What if Antarctica is the missing continent of a forgotten race? Imagine for a second that you are scrolling through Google Earth. Maybe you are bored. Maybe you are curious. You punch in some random coordinates near the South Pole, and suddenly you see it. A massive triangular structure, perfectly symmetrical, over a mile wide at the base, rising out of the frozen wasteland of Antarctica like something that should not exist. The coordinates are 79 degrees, 58 minutes, 39.25 seconds south, 81 degrees, 57 minutes, 32.21 seconds west. Go ahead. Look it up yourself. I will wait. What you are looking at is either the most incredible geological coincidence in human history, or evidence of something that will rewrite everything we thought we knew about our past. And this is just the beginning. Because here is what nobody wants to talk about. Here is the question that makes governments nervous and scientists change the subject. What if Antarctica was not always frozen? What if, thousands of years ago, it was home to an advanced civilization? And what if that civilization did not just disappear? What if it was buried? Let me take you back to 1946. World War II has just ended. The world is exhausted. Cities are rebuilding. Soldiers are coming home. But in December of that year, the United States launched the largest expedition to Antarctica in human history. They called it Operation Highjump. 4,700 men, 13 ships, including the aircraft carrier USS Philippines Sea, 33 aircraft, 200 tons of supplies. This was not a research mission. This was an invasion force, and they were heading to the most inhospitable place on Earth, supposedly to train soldiers in extreme cold and test equipment. But here is where it gets strange. The mission was planned to last 6 to 8 months. They pulled out after just 2 months. One aircraft crashed under mysterious circumstances. 3 men died. And when they came back, most of the mission details were immediately classified, sealed away, locked up tight. And here is the part that should make your skin crawl. Those documents, still classified, until 2030. Why? What did they find down there that needs to stay secret for almost a century? The man in charge of Operation Highjump was Rear Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd, a legitimate American hero, polar explorer, Medal of Honor recipient, not some conspiracy theorist with a blog. This was a man whose word carried weight, and when he came back from Antarctica, he gave an interview to a Chilean newspaper called El Mercurio on March 5th, 1947. In that interview, Admiral Byrd said something that still echoes through declassified documents and conspiracy forums to this day. He said that the United States needed to prepare for the possibility of an invasion by aircraft that could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. From pole to pole. Think about that. Why would he say that? What did he see? Shortly after that interview, Byrd was ordered to undergo psychiatric evaluation. The man who had been to Antarctica multiple times, who had mapped vast regions of the continent, was suddenly being questioned about his mental state. And then, just a few years later in 1955, the United States launched another massive operation, Operation Deep Freeze, even bigger than Highjump. This time, they built permanent bases. They dug in. And in 1961, 12 countries, including the United States and the Soviet Union, signed the Antarctic Treaty. This treaty banned all military activity, mineral mining, and nuclear testing on the entire continent. On the surface, it sounds like an environmental protection agreement. But think about the timing. The Cold War was raging. The Soviets and Americans could not agree on anything. They were building nuclear weapons, racing to space, fighting proxy wars around the globe. But somehow, they both agreed that nobody should exploit Antarctica. Why? What is down there that both superpowers decided was too dangerous to touch? Now, let us talk about something even older. Something that predates modern exploration by centuries. In 1929, a German theologian was cataloguing ancient documents at the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, Turkey. Hidden among dusty scrolls and forgotten manuscripts, he found a map. Not just any map. A map drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis. The map was drawn on gazelle leather. It showed the coastline of South America with remarkable accuracy. But it showed something else too, something impossible. It showed the coastline of Antarctica, in detail, with mountains, with rivers, without ice. The map showed Antarctica as it would look if the ice sheet was not there. And here is the problem. Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820. The Piri Reis map predates that discovery by over 300 years, and it gets worse. Antarctica has been covered in ice for at least 6,000 years. Some scientists say as long as 34 million years. So how did an admiral in 1513 have a map of Antarctica without ice? Piri Reis himself wrote notes on the map. He claimed he compiled it from over 20 source maps. Some of those source maps, he said, dated back to the time of Alexander the Great, others even older. He was not claiming to have drawn it himself. He was saying he copied it from ancient sources, sources that no longer exist. In 1966, Professor Charles Hapgood from Keene College in New Hampshire sent the Piri Reis map to the United States Air Force Cartographic Division. He wanted expert analysis. The response he got back is a matter of public record. The Air Force confirmed that the map depicted the coastline of Queen Maud Land in Antarctica with stunning accuracy. But they added something chilling. The geographical details shown could only have been obtained through seismic surveys or modern ground-penetrating radar, the kind of technology we did not have until the mid-20th century. Who mapped Antarctica before the ice? And how? But the Piri Reis map is not alone. In 1531, a French cartographer named ORONTEUS FINAEUS created another map. This one showed the entire continent of Antarctica as a separate landmass, with interior mountains, with rivers flowing to the coast. Again, this was almost 300 years before Antarctica was officially discovered. In 1737, a French geographer named Philippe Boische published a map showing Antarctica divided into two major landmasses, separated by a channel of water. We did not confirm this detail until the 1950s when we used radar to penetrate the ice sheet. Boische somehow knew about it in 1737. These maps raise an uncomfortable question. If ancient civilizations knew about Antarctica and mapped it accurately, then who were they? Where did they come from? And what happened to them? Now, before we go any further, I want to pause for just a moment. If you are finding this as fascinating as I am, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications, because we're about to go deep into one of the most controversial topics in alternative history. And trust me, you are not going to want to miss what comes next. We are talking about lost civilizations, secret military operations, ancient maps, and mysteries buried under 2 miles of ice. This is the kind of stuff they do not teach in school, so stick with me. Let us figure this out together. Alright, back to Antarctica, because things are about to get even stranger. Let us talk about Atlantis. You have heard the story. The legendary lost continent described by the Greek philosopher Plato around 360 BC. Plato wrote about Atlantis in 2 of his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. He described it as a powerful naval empire that existed 9,000 years before his time. That would place Atlantis around 9600 BC, right at the end of the last ice age. Plato said Atlantis was larger than Libya and Asia combined. It was a land of advanced technology, grand architecture, and immense wealth. And then, in a single day and night, it was destroyed by earthquakes and floods, sinking beneath the ocean. For centuries, people have searched for Atlantis. They have looked in the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. But what if everyone has been looking in the wrong place? What if Atlantis was not in the ocean at all? What if it was frozen? Think about it. Antarctica, if you remove the ice, is 14 million square kilometers. That is larger than Europe. Before it drifted to the South Pole, before it froze, it would have been temperate, livable. Plato described Atlantis as having mountains surrounding a fertile plain to the south. If you look at the topography of Antarctica beneath the ice using modern ground-penetrating radar, you see exactly that. Mountain ranges encircling massive interior plains. And then there is the timing. Plato said Atlantis was destroyed around 9600 BC. That is right in the middle of a geological event called the Younger Dryas Impact. Around 12,800 years ago, evidence suggests that a comet or asteroid slammed into the ice sheet covering North America. The impact caused massive flooding, rapid climate shifts, and the extinction of megafauna like woolly mammoths and saber-toothed cats. This event is marked in the geological record by a layer of platinum and a black carbon mat found across the entire planet. The Younger Dryas impact may have also triggered something called Earth crust displacement. This is a theory proposed by Professor Charles Hapgood. The idea is that the outer crust of the Earth can shift rapidly over the molten interior, moving entire continents thousands of miles in a matter of decades. If this happened, Antarctica could have slid from a temperate latitude down to the South Pole almost overnight in geological terms, freezing a thriving civilization in place. Is that what happened to Atlantis? Was it not swallowed by the ocean but buried under ice? And here is the truly terrifying thought. If a civilization was thriving in Antarctica 12,000 years ago, and if it was destroyed suddenly by a global cataclysm, then what remains of it is still down there, under 2 miles of ice, perfectly preserved, waiting. The Piri Reis map sits behind glass in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. If you ever get the chance to see it in person, do it, because photographs do not capture the weight of what you are looking at. This is not just an old map. This is a document that should not exist. The map was discovered in 1929 during renovations at the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. A German theologian named Gustav Adolf Diesmann was sorting through old documents when he found it rolled up among forgotten Ottoman archives. The map is drawn on gazelle leather, and only about 1/3 of the original survives. What remains shows the western coast of Africa, the eastern coast of South America, and something that looks like a landmass extending south from the tip of South America. That landmass is what gets people talking. Piri Reis was not some random cartographer. He was an Ottoman admiral and a skilled navigator. In the notes written directly on the map, he explains his methodology. He says he compiled this map in Gallipoli, which is modern-day Gallipoli, in the month of Muharram in the year 919 of the Islamic calendar. That translates to sometime between April and May of 1513. He goes on to say that he used approximately 20 source maps as references. Some of these source maps, he claims, dated back to the time of Alexander the Great, which would be around 330 BC. Others, he says, were even older. He specifically mentions that some of his sources were used by Christopher Columbus himself during his voyage to the New World. Now here is where it gets interesting. The map shows the coastline of South America with shocking accuracy for 1513, but it also shows something else. Extending south from the tip of South America is a coastline that many researchers believe depicts Antarctica. Not Antarctica as we know it today, covered in ice, but Antarctica as it would appear if the ice sheet were removed, and the details are disturbingly precise. In 1949, a joint United States Navy and British expedition used seismic sounding equipment to map the subglacial topography of Queen Maud Land in Antarctica. This was cutting-edge technology at the time. They were bouncing sound waves through miles of ice to see what the actual bedrock looked like underneath. When they published their findings, something strange happened. Researchers noticed that the subglacial coastline matched the southern portion of the Piri Reis map. The bays, the inlets, the river mouths, they lined up. In the 1960s, Professor Charles Hapgood became obsessed with this mystery. Hapgood was a historian at Keene College in New Hampshire, and he was not some fringe figure. He corresponded with Albert Einstein about his theories on Earth crust displacement. Einstein took him seriously enough to write the foreword to one of his books. Hapgood examined the Piri Reis map in detail and sent it to the United States Air Force for analysis. The Air Force response, dated July 6, 1960, is a matter of public record. The letter was signed by Lieutenant Colonel Harold Z. Ohlmeyer, the commander of the 8th Reconnaissance Technical Squadron at Westover Air Force Base. Ohlmeyer wrote, and I am quoting directly here, "The geographical detail shown in the lower part of the map agrees very remarkably with the results of the seismic profile made across the top of the ice cap by the Swedish-British Antarctic expedition of 1949. This indicates the coastline had been mapped before it was covered by the ice cap. The ice cap in this region is now about a mile thick. We have no idea how the data on this map can be reconciled with the supposed state of geographical knowledge in 1513. Read that last part again. We have no idea. This is the United States Air Force, with access to the best cartographers and geologists in the world, admitting they cannot explain it. The ice sheet covering Queen Maud Land is at least 6,000 years old. Some estimates put it at closer to 34 million years old. So how did Piri Reis, or his ancient sources, have access to a map of Antarctica without ice? The standard academic explanation is that the Piri Reis map does not show Antarctica at all. Mainstream historians argue that the southern landmass is simply a distorted depiction of the South American coast, stretched and exaggerated due to errors in copying and projection. They say people are seeing what they want to see. Pareidolia, pattern recognition gone wrong. And to be fair, the map is not perfect. There are distortions. The scale is inconsistent in places. But that explanation does not account for the specific details that match the subglacial topography. It does not explain the rivers. It does not explain the mountains in the interior. Professor Hapgood proposed a radical theory. He suggested that an advanced civilization existed during the last ice age, before 12,000 years ago, and that this civilization had the ability to navigate and map the world with extreme precision. According to Hapgood, these ancient cartographers created a series of highly accurate maps, and those maps were copied and passed down through the ages. By the time they reached the medieval world, the people copying them no longer understood the advanced projection methods used in the originals, so they introduced errors. But the underlying data, the geographical details, remained accurate because they were based on actual observation. Observation made thousands of years earlier, before Antarctica froze. Now let us talk about the other maps, because Piri Reis is not alone. In 1531, a French mathematician and cartographer named ORONTEUS FINAEUS created a world map. It is called the ORONTEUS FINAEUS map, and it is housed in the Library of Congress. This map shows Antarctica as a distinct continent, not as part of South America, not as some vague blob, as a separate landmass centered on the South Pole. It shows mountains running through the interior. It shows what appear to be rivers flowing from the interior to the coast. And it shows Antarctica much larger than it appears on modern maps, because it shows the landmass without the ice sheet. Here is the problem. Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820, when a Russian expedition led by Fabian Gottlieb von Bellinghausen sighted the continent. The first confirmed landing did not happen until 1895. So how did ORONTEUS FINAEUS draw a detailed map of Antarctica in 1531, almost 300 years before anyone supposedly knew it existed? Mainstream historians argue that FINAEUS was simply speculating. They say he was filling in blank spaces on his map with imaginary landmasses, based on the ancient Greek theory that there must be a large southern continent to balance the weight of the northern continents. They point to the fact that the Greeks called this hypothetical landmass Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. But that explanation falls apart when you look at the details. FINAEUS was not drawing a vague blob to balance his map. He was drawing specific geographical features, mountain ranges, river systems, coastal indentations, features that we only confirmed with ground-penetrating radar in the 20th century. Then there is the Buache map. In 1737, French geographer Philippe Buache published a map of Antarctica that showed the continent divided into two large islands, separated by a body of water running through the interior. Again, this is over 80 years before Antarctica was officially discovered. We did not confirm that Antarctica is actually two land masses connected by ice until the International Geophysical Year in 1957 and 1958, when researchers used seismic surveys and radar to map the bedrock. Under the ice, Antarctica is indeed divided into East Antarctica and West Antarctica, separated by a subglacial trench. Buache somehow knew this in 1737. How? Where did he get his information? Like Piri Reis, Buache claimed to be working from older sources. He said his map was based on earlier charts that had been passed down through generations. But he did not say who created those original charts, or when, or how they obtained such precise information. Let us think about what it would take to create these maps. First, you would need to physically travel to Antarctica. That means ships capable of navigating the Southern Ocean, one of the most dangerous bodies of water on the planet. You would need to survive the cold, the storms, the icebergs. Then you would need to accurately measure latitude and longitude. Latitude is relatively easy. You can determine your latitude by measuring the angle of the sun or stars above the horizon. But longitude is a different story. To calculate longitude, you need to know the precise time at your location and compare it to the time at a reference point, usually the prime meridian. That requires an accurate clock, a chronometer. The marine chronometer was not invented until 1735 by John Harrison. Before that, calculating longitude at sea was almost impossible. So if the source maps used by Reis date back thousands of years, as he claims, then whoever made those maps had technology equivalent to, or better than what we had in the 18th century. They had precise timekeeping, they had advanced mathematics, they had seaworthy ships, and they had the organizational capacity to mount global expeditions and compile the data into accurate maps. That sounds like a civilization, an advanced one. Now, some researchers have suggested that these maps are evidence of extraterrestrial contact. Ancient astronaut theorists argue that aliens visited Earth thousands of years ago and either created these maps themselves or provided the technology to early humans to do so. That is certainly one explanation, but it is not the only one. And honestly, it is not the most interesting one. Because if we accept that these maps are real, if we accept that they depict Antarctica without ice, then we are forced to confront a different possibility. The possibility that human civilization is far older and far more advanced than we have been taught. The mainstream historical narrative tells us that civilization began around 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia with the Sumerians. Before that, we are told, humans were scattered hunter-gatherers, living in small tribes, barely surviving. The idea of a global maritime civilization mapping continents 12,000 years ago simply does not fit that narrative. But what if the narrative is wrong? What if the Younger Dryas impact around 12,800 years ago wiped out an advanced civilization, and what we call the rise of civilization in Mesopotamia and Egypt was actually a slow recovery, a rebuilding by the survivors? Before we go any further, I am curious, where are you watching this from right now? Drop a comment and let me know what city or country you are in, and what time it is where you are. Are you watching this at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep because these questions are keeping you up? Or maybe it is a lazy Sunday afternoon, and you are just discovering how deep this mystery goes. I love seeing where all of you are tuning in from, because this story, this mystery, it connects people from all over the world. So go ahead, leave a comment. Tell me where you are. There is a theory in archaeology called hyperdiffusionism. It is widely rejected by mainstream academics, but it is worth considering. Hyperdiffusionism suggests that many of the great ancient civilizations, the Egyptians, the Sumerians, the Indus Valley, the Maya, did not develop independently. Instead, they were all seeded by an earlier mother civilization. In 1996, Russian scientists drilling through the ice sheet in East Antarctica hit something they were not expecting. At a depth of over 2 miles beneath the frozen surface, their instruments detected liquid water, not just a puddle, not just a small underground stream, an entire lake, a massive subglacial lake that had been sealed off from the rest of the world for somewhere between 15 and 25 million years. They called it Lake Vostok. The lake is enormous. It stretches over 150 miles long and 30 miles wide at its widest point. The water is nearly half a mile deep in places. To put that in perspective, Lake Vostok contains more water than Lake Ontario. It is one of the largest lakes on Earth, and until 1996, we had no idea it existed. But size is not what makes Lake Vostok fascinating. What makes it fascinating is what might be living inside it. The surface of the ice above Lake Vostok is the coldest place on Earth. The Russian Vostok station, which sits directly above the lake, recorded the lowest naturally occurring temperature ever measured on the surface of our planet, -128.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That was back in 1983. At that temperature, exposed skin freezes in seconds. Breath crystallizes instantly. Metal becomes brittle. It is a place that is fundamentally hostile to life as we know it. But 2 miles down, beneath all that ice, the water in Lake Vostok hovers right around -3 degrees Celsius. That is about 26 degrees Fahrenheit, below freezing. But the water stays liquid because of the immense pressure from the ice above it. Pressure keeps it from solidifying. And here is where things get strange. The lake is not frozen. It is not stagnant. There is evidence of water circulation, thermal activity. Geothermal vents at the bottom of the lake might be pumping heat up from the Earth's mantle. That means the lake has an energy source. And where there is liquid water and an energy source, there is the possibility of life. In 2001, scientists analyzing satellite data noticed something odd. There was a magnetic anomaly over Lake Vostok. Not a small one. A significant gravitational and magnetic disturbance concentrated in the southeastern portion of the lake. The anomaly was strong enough that it suggested the presence of something large and metallic beneath the ice. Some researchers speculated it might be a massive meteorite impact crater. Others suggested mineral deposits. Nickel, iron, something dense enough to create a gravitational pull. But then the theories got more exotic. What if the magnetic anomaly was not natural? What if it was a structure, an artificial object buried under the ice and submerged in the lake? The idea sounds absurd, until you remember that Lake Vostok has been isolated for millions of years. If something crashed there, if something was built there before the ice formed, it would still be there, perfectly preserved, waiting. The Russian team continued drilling, slowly, carefully. They were not just drilling through ice. They were drilling toward a pristine ecosystem that had been cut off from the rest of the planet since before humans existed. Contaminating the lake with drilling fluids or bacteria from the surface would be a scientific catastrophe. So they developed specialized techniques. They used thermal drills. They used kerosene and freon as drilling fluids, substances they hoped would not mix with the lake water, and they kept going down. In February of 2012, after more than 2 decades of drilling, the Russian team finally penetrated the ice and reached the surface of Lake Vostok. They drilled down 2.5 miles, through ice that had been accumulating for hundreds of thousands of years. And when they pulled up their first samples of lake water, frozen in the borehole, they found something that stunned the scientific community. Life. Lots of it. The initial analysis identified over 3,500 unique species of microorganisms in the water samples. Most of them were bacteria, but not just any bacteria. These were species that did not match anything in existing genetic databases. Their DNA sequences were unlike anything scientists had seen before. Some of the microbes seemed related to species found in deep ocean hydrothermal vents. Others had genetic markers that suggested they had been evolving in isolation for millions of years, cut off from the rest of the biosphere, adapting to extreme pressure, near freezing temperatures, and complete darkness. One particular bacterium, labeled W123-10, had a genetic sequence so unusual that researchers could not classify it. It did not fit neatly into any known family. It was not closely related to anything living on the surface. It was alien in the truest sense. Not from another planet, but so divergent from known life that it might as well be. And that raised an uncomfortable question. If life this strange could evolve in isolation beneath the ice of Antarctica, what else might be down there? In 2013, the Russians published more findings. They reported that the lake contained high concentrations of oxygen, much higher than expected, 50 times higher than typical freshwater lakes. That level of oxygen saturation could support complex life, not just bacteria, potentially larger organisms, fish, invertebrates, things that could move and hunt and adapt. But the Russians stopped talking. After 2013, the flow of information slowed to a trickle. Official reports became vague, press releases stopped, and the rumors started. According to unconfirmed reports circulating in the scientific community, the Russian team encountered something in the lake that they were not prepared for, something they did not want to publicize. The story goes that during one of the later dives using a remotely operated submersible, the equipment malfunctioned. The submersible stopped responding. The tether went slack. When they finally hauled it back up, the cameras were damaged and the data was corrupted. But some of the footage survived. And what it showed allegedly was movement. Large movement. Something in the water that was not a microbe. The creature, if the stories are to be believed, was given a designation, Organism 46B, described as having a body roughly 14 feet long, with 14 appendages extending from a central mass. Witnesses claimed it moved with intelligence. It did not drift. It pursued. There were reports of team members experiencing paralysis when near the drilling site. Unexplained medical episodes. One researcher allegedly described the creature as capable of mimicry, changing the texture and color of its skin to blend with its surroundings. Now let me be clear. There is no verified evidence for Organism 46B, no peer-reviewed papers, no official photographs. The story exists primarily in forums, in leaked documents of questionable authenticity, and in the accounts of anonymous sources. It could very easily be a hoax, an internet legend, the kind of story that grows in the absence of information. But the fact remains that after 2013, Russian scientists became far less forthcoming about what they were finding in Lake Vostok. And that silence is suspicious. Why stop publishing? Why go quiet after making one of the most significant biological discoveries of the century? Some have speculated that the Russian government classified the findings, that they found something with military or strategic value. Others believe the scientists simply wanted to avoid sensationalism and are conducting research privately before making any major announcements. But there is another possibility. What if they found something they could not explain, something that did not fit into any biological framework? And what if they decided it was safer to say nothing at all? Lake Vostok is not the only subglacial lake in Antarctica. We have identified over 400 of them using ice-penetrating radar. Some are small, some are large. They form a vast, interconnected network of liquid water beneath the ice sheet. Rivers flow between them. Entire subterranean drainage systems exist down there, hidden from view, and we have barely explored any of it. Lake Vostok is the largest, and even there, we have only scratched the surface. We have taken a few water samples. We have dropped a few sensors, but we have not sent humans down. We have not conducted a thorough biological survey. We have no idea what the full ecosystem looks like. Think about the implications. If Lake Vostok has been isolated for 15 million years, and if it contains life that evolved independently from the rest of Earth's biosphere, then it represents a separate origin, a second genesis. Life that started from different chemical building blocks, or followed a different evolutionary path. Studying that life could revolutionize our understanding of biology. It could tell us how life begins, how it adapts, how it survives in the most extreme conditions imaginable. And if life can thrive beneath 2 miles of ice in Antarctica, then it can thrive beneath the ice on Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. It can thrive on Enceladus, one of Saturn's moons, both of which have subsurface oceans. Lake Vostok is not just a curiosity. It is a blueprint for finding life elsewhere in the solar system. But there is something else to consider, something that ties back to the mystery of ancient Antarctica. If Lake Vostok existed before the ice sheet formed, if it was an open body of water millions of years ago, when Antarctica was temperate and green, then it would have been visible, accessible, a massive freshwater lake in the interior of the continent. And if an advanced civilization existed in Antarctica 12,000 years ago, as some researchers suggest, then Lake Vostok would have been a vital resource. Fresh water, fish, a center of life. Cities could have been built on its shores. Now imagine that civilization being buried. Imagine the ice advancing over centuries or millennia. Imagine the survivors retreating underground, seeking refuge in caves and tunnels warmed by geothermal heat. Could they have survived? Could a remnant population have endured beneath the ice, adapting, evolving, becoming something different? It sounds like science fiction, but life finds a way. We see it over and over. Extremophiles living in boiling acid pools, bacteria thriving in radioactive waste, ecosystems flourishing around hydrothermal vents at the bottom of the ocean, where sunlight never reaches. Life is resilient, tenacious, It does not give up easily. The magnetic anomaly at Lake Vostok still has no definitive explanation. The high oxygen content is still not fully understood. The strange microbes with unknown DNA are still being studied. And the Russian research station sits above it all, drilling, probing, searching. What are they looking for? What have they already found? And why does the rest of the world seem so uninterested in asking? We live in an age where you can see almost anywhere on Earth from your computer. Satellite imagery has made the world transparent. Google Earth will show you the streets of Tokyo, the glaciers of Iceland, the deserts of Namibia, all in high definition, all available at the click of a mouse. But there are places that remain stubbornly unclear, blurry, pixelated, and one of those places is Antarctica. Pull up Google Earth right now and zoom in on the interior of Antarctica. Go ahead. Try it. You will notice something strange. Large sections of the continent are either low resolution or completely obscured. Entire regions appear smudged, as if someone took an eraser to the image. The official explanation is data gaps, harsh weather conditions, satellite orbital limitations. But when users started zooming in on specific coordinates and sharing what they found, things got interesting. In 2012, a user on a conspiracy forum posted a set of coordinates: 74 degrees, 16 minutes south, 164 degrees, 45 minutes east. When you plug those numbers into Google Earth, you see something that does not look natural. It looks like a massive disc-shaped object, partially embedded in the ice. The structure, if that is what it is, measures roughly 400 meters in diameter. It has a defined circular edge. There appears to be symmetry, and it sits at an angle, as if it crashed and slid to a stop. The image went viral. Thousands of people examined it. Some claimed it was obviously a UFO, a crashed extraterrestrial craft buried in the ice. Others said it was a natural rock formation, a nunatak, which is a peak of rock that protrudes through the ice sheet. Geologists weighed in, saying the circular shape could be explained by volcanic activity or erosion patterns. But the problem is that the structure does not quite match any known geological formation. It is too symmetrical, too clean, and the shadowing suggests depth, as if part of it extends below the surface. Now, is it a spaceship? Probably not. Is it a natural formation that happens to look artificial due to lighting and image compression? Probably. But the fact that it exists at all, in a region of Antarctica that is largely unexplored, raises questions. And it is not the only anomaly. In 2016, another set of coordinates started making the rounds. 79 degrees, 58 minutes, 39 seconds south. 81 degrees, 57 minutes, 32 seconds west. This is the one I mentioned at the very beginning, the pyramid. When you look at the satellite image, you see a triangular structure rising out of the snow. The edges are sharp, the faces appear flat. The proportions are eerily close to the pyramids of Egypt. It sits in the Ellsworth Mountains, a remote and largely unvisited region of West Antarctica. Skeptics immediately pointed out that pyramidal peaks are common in mountainous regions. When glaciers carve away at a mountain from multiple sides, they can create a pyramid shape naturally. It is called a horn peak. The Matterhorn in Switzerland is a famous example. So the Antarctica pyramid could easily be explained as a natural horn peak shaped by thousands of years of glacial erosion. But here is the thing. The structure in question is remarkably symmetrical. Most natural pyramidal peaks have irregular faces. They are rough, uneven. This one, at least from the satellite image, looks almost geometrically precise. Researchers who believe in a lost Antarctic civilization point to this structure as potential evidence of ancient construction. They argue that if a civilization existed in Antarctica before the ice, they would have built monuments, temples, pyramids, just like every other ancient culture. The Egyptians built pyramids. The Maya built pyramids. The Sumerians built ziggurats, which are essentially step pyramids. Why would an Antarctic civilization be any different? And if those structures were buried under ice for thousands of years, they would still be there, frozen in time, waiting to be uncovered. Then there are the alleged entrances. In 2015, a researcher claimed to have found what looks like a massive cave opening in the side of a mountain. The coordinates were shared online: 66 degrees, 36 minutes, 12.58 seconds south, 99 degrees, 43 minutes, 12.72 seconds east. When you look at the location on Google Earth, you see what appears to be a rectangular opening in the rock face. It is dark. It is large enough to fit several buildings inside, and it is located in a region that is completely inaccessible to casual exploration. Is it a cave? Almost certainly. Antarctica has plenty of caves formed by volcanic activity, glacial melting, and geothermal vents. Some of these caves are huge. Some are warm inside due to geothermal heat, with temperatures that can reach above freezing even in the middle of winter. Moss and algae have been found growing in some of these caves. It is entirely plausible that this is just a natural cave entrance, but the shape bothers people. It looks too regular, too rectangular, and the fact that it exists in such a remote location, far from any research station, means nobody has actually gone there to verify what it is. Another anomaly appeared in 2017, 66 degrees, 16 minutes, 18.79 seconds south, 100 degrees, 59 minutes, 7.84 seconds east. This one is described as a metallic-looking oval structure sitting on the surface of the ice. The object is approximately 70 meters long and appears to have a smooth, reflective surface. It does not look like rock. It does not look like ice. It looks like metal. Again, the explanations vary. Some say it is a research station or an abandoned equipment cache. Others say it is ice with unusual lighting that creates the appearance of a metallic sheen. And some, predictably, claim it is a downed craft of some kind. Without boots on the ground, without direct investigation, we are left guessing. But the pattern is undeniable. Antarctica is full of things that do not quite make sense when viewed from above. Now let us go back to Oronteus FINAEUS. His map from 1531 shows Antarctica not as a frozen wasteland, but as a continent with interior features, rivers, mountains, bays. The level of detail suggests direct observation, not guesswork. But how could FINAEUS, or anyone in the 16th century, observe Antarctica? The continent was not officially discovered for another 300 years, unless he was working from older maps made by someone who had actually been there, someone who saw Antarctica before the ice. If we entertain that possibility, even just as a thought experiment, then we have to ask what else those ancient cartographers might have documented. Did they map cities? Did they record the locations of temples or structures? Did they leave clues encoded in their charts? Because if the Piri Reis map and the Oronteus FINAEUS map are both based on ancient source material, then those sources might contain far more information than we realize. Information that has been lost, or suppressed, or simply misunderstood. There is a strange story that surfaces occasionally in alternative history circles. It involves Admiral Richard Byrd again, but this time not Operation Highjump. This time it is from his earlier expeditions. In 1947, shortly after returning from Operation Highjump, Byrd allegedly gave a series of interviews where he hinted at discoveries that could not be made public. He spoke in vague terms about vast lands beyond the pole, about resources and landscapes that defied expectation. Some interpretations of his words suggest he found openings in the ice, entrances to cavern systems or even hollow regions beneath the surface. He described flying over areas that should have been frozen solid, but instead showed signs of vegetation and open water. The mainstream interpretation is that Byrd was describing relatively mundane geographical features, and that conspiracy theorists have twisted his words out of context. But his statements were strange enough that they fueled decades of speculation. And when you combine those statements with the satellite anomalies, with the ancient maps, with the unexplained structures, a picture starts to form. Not a clear picture, not a definitive one, but a picture nonetheless. Marie Byrd Land is the largest unclaimed territory on Earth, 1.6 million square kilometers of West Antarctica that no country has formally claimed sovereignty over. It is vast, remote, and largely unexplored, and it is home to several of the most intriguing satellite anomalies, including the so-called pyramid and several of the cave-like openings. There are also restricted fly zones over portions of Marie Byrd Land. areas where civilian and even most military aircraft are not permitted. The official reason is scientific research and safety concerns. But the restrictions are unusually broad and unusually vague. What is being protected? What is being hidden? Or is nothing being hidden at all? And we are simply projecting mystery onto a blank space on the map. It is impossible to say without direct investigation. And direct investigation in Antarctica is expensive, dangerous, and tightly controlled. You cannot just book a flight and start exploring. The Antarctic Treaty governs all activity on the continent. Research must be approved. Permits must be obtained. And large sections of the interior remain off limits for reasons that are not always explained. The truth is, we know very little about what lies beneath the ice. Ground-penetrating radar has given us rough outlines. We know there are mountains and valleys and lakes, but we do not know the fine details. We do not know if there are caves with breathable air. We do not know if there are ruins of any kind. We do not know because we have not looked. Or if we have looked, we have not shared what we found. And listen, if you are finding this as intriguing as I am, it would mean a lot if you hit that like button. I know, everyone asks for that, but here is why it actually matters. When you like and share videos like this, it tells the algorithm that people want to see this kind of content. It helps get these questions, these mysteries, in front of more people who are curious about what is really going on down there in Antarctica. Because we are just getting started, and trust me, the next part about Operation Highjump is going to blow your mind. But no pressure, only if you want to keep exploring this with me. Now, where were we? Oh right, Marie Byrd Land, the largest unclaimed territory on Earth. World War II ended in August of 1945. The world was exhausted. Europe lay in ruins. Japan was rebuilding from atomic devastation. Millions were dead. Economies were shattered. Soldiers were coming home. Everyone wanted peace. Everyone wanted normalcy. So when the United States Navy announced in late 1946 that they were launching the largest expedition to Antarctica in human history, people were confused. Why now? Why there? And why so many ships and men? The operation was officially called the United States Navy Antarctic Developments Program, but everyone knew it by its code name, Operation Highjump. The stated objectives were straightforward: train personnel and test equipment in frigid conditions, establish a research base, conduct scientific surveys, consolidate American presence in Antarctica. Standard stuff. Boring, even. Except nothing about the operation was standard. The task force assembled for Operation Highjump was staggering. 13 ships, 4,700 men, 33 aircraft, including seaplanes, helicopters, and flying boats. The flagship was the USS Mount Olympus, a communications command ship. They brought the aircraft carrier USS Philippine Sea, loaded with fighter planes and reconnaissance aircraft. They brought submarines, icebreakers, supply ships, tankers. This was not a scientific expedition. This was a military armada. For context, the entire population of Antarctica at the time, including all international research teams combined, was maybe a few dozen people. Most of the continent was completely unexplored. There were no permanent bases, no infrastructure, no strategic value that anyone could identify. And yet the United States committed a force equivalent to a small invasion. The cost was enormous. Over $50 million in 1946 money. Adjusted for inflation, that is well over $700 million today, for a training exercise. Admiral Richard Byrd was placed in command. Byrd was not just any officer, he was a national hero, a decorated aviator. He had led multiple expeditions to Antarctica in the 1920s and 30s. He had flown over the South Pole in 1929, becoming one of the first men to do so. He knew the continent better than almost anyone alive. If you were going to send someone to Antarctica for a routine mission, Byrd was the obvious choice. But this was not routine. The fleet departed from Norfolk, Virginia, in December of 1946. The plan was to spend 6 to 8 months in Antarctica. They would arrive during the Antarctic summer, when conditions were most favorable. They would establish a base of operations at Little America, a site Byrd had used in previous expeditions. From there, they would fan out, map the coastline, survey the interior, take photographs, collect data, and then, in late February or early March, as winter approached, they would pack up and come home. That was the plan, but it did not go that way. The operation began normally enough. The fleet arrived in Antarctica in early January of 1947. They set up their base. They launched flights. The aircraft carrier Philippine Sea launched its planes on reconnaissance missions over the interior. Byrd himself flew multiple sorties, covering thousands of square miles of previously unmapped territory. Cameras rolled. Data was collected. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. And then, suddenly, it was not. On February 3rd, 1947, less than 2 months after arriving, Admiral Byrd gave the order to withdraw. Immediately. The operation was being terminated early. No detailed explanation was provided. The official record states that the early withdrawal was due to weather conditions and the loss of aircraft. But the weather in February was still relatively stable. And while they did lose one aircraft, a PBM Mariner flying boat that crashed during a whiteout, losing 3 men, that alone did not justify abandoning a $50 million operation months ahead of schedule. The fleet left Antarctica in a hurry. By late February, they were gone. When they returned to the United States in April of 1947, the debriefing was immediate and classified. Most of the men involved were told not to discuss what they had seen or done. Admiral Byrd was subjected to what some reports describe as a psychiatric evaluation. Why would a decorated admiral, a man who had spent years in Antarctica without incident, suddenly need a mental health assessment after a routine mission? Then came the interview. On March 5th, 1947, just days after returning from Antarctica, Byrd gave an interview to a Chilean newspaper called El Mercurio. The journalist was a man named Lee Van Atta, and what Byrd said in that interview has fueled conspiracy theories ever since. He warned that the United States needed to take defensive measures against enemy aircraft that could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. He said, and this is a direct translation from the Spanish, that in the event of a new war, the continental United States would be attacked by craft that could fly over one or both poles with fantastic speed. Enemy aircraft, flying from pole to pole, at fantastic speed. Who was the enemy? World War II was over. Germany had surrendered. Japan had surrendered. The Cold War had not yet fully ignited. The Soviet Union was technically an ally at that point, though tensions were rising. But the Soviets did not have aircraft capable of flying from pole to pole at fantastic speed. Nobody did. Jet engines were still relatively new. Intercontinental bombers were years away. So what was Byrd talking about? The interview was published in Chile, but barely mentioned in American media. Shortly afterward, Byrd was called to Washington for extensive debriefing. He was reportedly told to stop giving interviews. The details of Operation Highjump were sealed. Documents were classified, and they remain classified to this day. The official declassification date for most Operation Highjump materials is 2048. That is over 100 years after the operation took place. Why does a training mission in Antarctica require a 100-year seal on documents? Theories began to circulate almost immediately. One of the most persistent is that Operation Highjump was not a scientific mission at all. It was a military operation to locate and destroy a secret Nazi base in Antarctica. According to this theory, as World War II was ending, high-ranking members of the Nazi regime escaped Europe and fled to a hidden base they had established in Antarctica years earlier. This base, allegedly called Base 211 or NEUSCHWABENLAND, was a refuge for Nazi scientists, advanced technology, and possibly even Adolf Hitler himself. Operation Highjump, in this version of events, was a full-scale military assault to root out the remaining Nazis and capture their technology. The theory is not as far-fetched as it might sound at first. In 1938 and 1939, Nazi Germany did conduct an expedition to Antarctica. They sent a ship called the Schwabenland to the region now known as Queen Maud Land. The Germans claimed a vast swath of territory, roughly 600,000 square kilometers, and named it Neuschwabenland, or New Swabia. They dropped thousands of metal poles with swastika flags from aircraft to mark their territory. They took extensive photographs. They mapped the region. And then, when the war started, the details of what they found went dark. There are rumors, unverified but persistent, that the Nazis discovered vast ice-free caverns in the interior of Neuschwabenland. Caverns kept warm by geothermal activity, caverns large enough to house an entire base, or even a city. The rumors say that toward the end of the war, as the Reich collapsed, submarines left Germany loaded with scientists, documents, and experimental technology. 2 submarines, U-530 and U-977, famously surrendered in Argentina in mid-1945, months after Germany had surrendered. What were they doing in the South Atlantic? Where had they been? If the Nazis did establish a base in Antarctica, it would make sense for the United States to send a force to deal with it. But if that was the mission, why not say so? Germany was defeated. The Nazis were the enemy. There would have been public support for a mission to capture Nazi war criminals. Instead, the operation was framed as scientific, and the results were sealed. That suggests something more complicated, something the government did not want the public to know. Another theory focuses on what Byrd encountered during the flights over the interior. According to some accounts, Byrd and his pilots reported seeing areas of Antarctica that were not frozen. Green valleys, open water, signs of vegetation. One often repeated story, though difficult to verify, claims that Byrd flew over the South Pole and encountered a region beyond the pole that was temperate, a land with mountains, forests, and even signs of habitation. This story is often tied to the hollow earth theory, the idea that the Earth is not solid but contains vast interior spaces accessible through openings at the poles. Byrd, according to this narrative, flew into one of these openings and encountered an advanced underground civilization. The hollow earth theory is fringe science at best, and complete fantasy at worst. We know from seismology that the Earth has a solid inner core and a molten outer core. There are no hollow spaces large enough to contain civilizations. But the persistence of the story suggests that something unusual was reported during the flights. Perhaps not a hollow Earth, but something unexpected. Geothermal activity creating ice-free zones, unusual geological formations, or even remnants of structures from an earlier era. One of the most interesting aspects of Operation Highjump is what happened immediately afterward. Less than a decade later, in 1955, the United States launched another massive Antarctic operation. This one was called Operation Deep Freeze. It was even larger than Highjump, and this time, the goal was explicitly to establish permanent bases on the continent. The United States built McMurdo Station, which remains the largest research station in Antarctica to this day. Other countries followed suit. The Soviet Union built Vostok Station. The British expanded their presence. Within a few years, Antarctica went from being almost completely uninhabited to hosting multiple permanent bases from multiple nations. Why the sudden interest? The official explanation is the International Geophysical Year of 1957 and 58, a global scientific effort to study the Earth's polar regions. But the build-up began before the IGY was even announced, and it was heavily militarized. Operation Deep Freeze was run by the United States Navy. Personnel were military. Equipment was military. The bases were built like fortifications. Something had shifted. Some priority had changed, and it happened right after Operation Highjump. Then came the Antarctic Treaty. In 1959, 12 countries, including the United States and the Soviet Union, signed a treaty that effectively neutralized Antarctica. The treaty banned all military activity on the continent. It prohibited nuclear testing. It froze all territorial claims. And it banned resource extraction, including mining and oil drilling. The treaty came into force in 1961 and remains in effect today. As of now, 54 countries have signed it. Think about the context. The Cold War was at its peak. The United States and Soviet Union were in a nuclear arms race. They were fighting proxy wars in Korea, Vietnam, and dozens of other places. They could not agree on anything. And yet, somehow, they both agreed to make Antarctica off-limits. Not just off-limits for one side or the other, but off-limits for everyone. No weapons, no bases with offensive capability, no exploitation of resources. Why? What was so important about Antarctica that it required a binding international treaty to keep everyone out? The standard answer is environmental protection. Antarctica is pristine. It is the last true wilderness. It is scientifically valuable. All of that is true. But environmental concerns were not a global priority in 1961. The environmental movement did not gain serious momentum until the late 1960s and 70s. In 1961, countries were dumping nuclear waste into the ocean without a second thought. They were testing hydrogen bombs in the atmosphere. They were clear-cutting rainforests. The idea that they suddenly cared deeply about protecting Antarctica strains credibility. A more cynical interpretation is that the treaty was designed not to protect Antarctica, but to control access to it. By making the continent neutral territory, no single country could claim exclusive rights to whatever might be there. And by banning resource extraction, they ensured that whatever is under the ice stays under the ice. At least until 2048, when the treaty comes up for review. That is when the mining ban expires. That is when countries will be free to renegotiate. And that is when, many believe, the real race for Antarctica will begin. But what are they racing for? What is under the ice that is worth waiting 100 years to access? Minerals? Oil? Something else? Or is the treaty less about resources and more about secrecy? About keeping the public away from something that was found during Operation Highjump or Operation Deep Freeze, something that cannot be explained, something that would raise too many questions. Admiral Byrd died in 1957 at the age of 68. He never publicly clarified his statements about enemy aircraft or fantastic speeds. The declassified portions of his journals and reports from Operation Highjump are frustratingly vague. Most of the mission details remain locked away. And the men who served under him, the pilots and sailors and scientists who were there, either stayed silent or have since passed away. Whatever they saw, whatever they experienced, went with them. Every culture on Earth has a flood myth. The details vary, but the structure is always the same. There was a great civilization. They grew proud. They angered the gods or nature or fate. And then the waters came. A deluge, a cataclysm. Most of humanity was wiped out. Only a few survived to rebuild. The story appears in Mesopotamia with the Epic of Gilgamesh, in the Bible with Noah, in Hindu texts with Manu. The Greeks told of Deucalion. The Chinese spoke of Gunyu. Indigenous tribes in the Americas, Australia, and the Pacific Islands all have versions of the same tale. Why? The standard explanation is that ancient peoples lived near rivers and coastlines. Floods were common, devastating. So naturally, flood stories became embedded in their mythology. But that does not explain the consistency. It does not explain why cultures separated by oceans, with no contact, tell nearly identical stories. It does not explain the specific details. The warnings ignored, the ark or boat, the animals saved, the mountain where the survivors landed. These are not just flood stories. They are stories of a global reset, a before and after, a lost world. Plato gave that lost world a name, Atlantis. In 360 BC, Plato wrote two dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. In them, he describes a conversation between the Greek statesman Solon and Egyptian priests. The priests tell Solon about a powerful island nation that existed 9,000 years before his time. That would place Atlantis around 9600 BC, right at the boundary between the last ice age and the current interglacial period. The priests describe Atlantis as larger than Libya and Asia combined, a maritime empire with advanced engineering, concentric rings of water and land surrounding a central citadel, canals, bridges, temples covered in precious metals, a society that had mastered navigation, metallurgy, and architecture. But Atlantis grew arrogant. They sought to conquer the known world. They waged war against Athens and other Mediterranean powers. And then, in a single day and night of catastrophic earthquakes and floods, Atlantis sank beneath the ocean and disappeared. Plato presents this not as allegory, but as history. He insists multiple times that the story is true, that it was passed down through Egyptian records, that Solon heard it directly from the priests at Sais. Yet no archaeological evidence has ever been found. No ruins, No inscriptions, no confirmation. Atlantis remains a legend. Or does it? What if everyone has been looking in the wrong place? Plato says Atlantis sank beneath the ocean, so researchers have searched the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, the North Sea, everywhere, except the one place that actually fits the description, Antarctica. Because Antarctica did not sink, it froze. And if you accept the theory of Earth crust displacement, if you accept that the outer shell of the planet can shift rapidly over the mantle, then Antarctica could have been in a temperate zone 12,000 years ago. It could have been green, inhabited, advanced, and then, suddenly, it was not. Charles Hapgood proposed this idea in his 1958 book, Earth's Shifting Crust. He argued that the crust of the Earth is not rigidly locked to the interior. It floats on a layer of molten rock, and under certain conditions, such as an imbalance of ice mass at the poles or a massive asteroid impact, the crust can shift, not slowly, over millions of years, but rapidly, in a matter of decades or centuries. When it shifts, entire continents can be displaced by thousands of miles. A landmass that was once near the equator can suddenly find itself at the pole, and vice versa. Albert Einstein took Hapgood seriously enough to write the foreword to his book. Einstein acknowledged that the theory had problems, but he believed it deserved investigation. If Hapgood was right, if the crust shifted around 12,000 years ago, then Antarctica would have moved from a position roughly 1,000 to 2,000 miles north of where it sits now. At that latitude, it would have had a climate similar to modern-day southern Chile or New Zealand. Cool, but habitable. Forests, grasslands, rivers, perfect conditions for a civilization to develop. And then the shift happened, perhaps triggered by the Younger Dryas impact event, when a comet or asteroid struck the North American ice sheet. The impact destabilized the crust. Antarctica slid south. The temperature dropped. Snow began to accumulate. Within a few centuries, the entire continent was entombed in ice. Anyone living there would have had no chance. The survivors, if there were any, would have fled north by sea, carrying with them whatever knowledge and technology they could salvage. They would have landed in South America, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, and they would have tried to rebuild. But the tools were gone. The infrastructure was gone. The bulk of the population was gone. What remained were fragments, stories, techniques passed down orally, seeds of knowledge that would take thousands of years to regrow. This is the hyperdiffusionist model. The idea that human civilization did not arise independently in multiple locations. It was seeded. There was a mother culture, a global maritime civilization that existed before the flood, and when that civilization was destroyed, the survivors became the teachers, the gods, the culture, heroes. Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, Viracocha in South America, Osiris in Egypt, Oannes in Mesopotamia, all described as bearded foreigners who arrived by sea and taught primitive people agriculture, astronomy, mathematics, and architecture. Then they left, promising to return. Plato describes Atlantis as having a sophisticated understanding of astronomy. They tracked the stars. They built temples aligned with celestial events. This matches what we see in ancient Egypt. The pyramids of Giza are aligned with Orion's belt. The Sphinx faces due east, toward the sunrise on the equinox. The precision is incredible. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north, with an error of less than 1/10 of a degree. How did they do that? The standard answer is trial and error, careful observation, and a lot of manpower. But that does not explain why the same precision shows up on the other side of the world. Teotihuacan in Mexico is aligned to the same celestial markers. So is Angkor Wat in Cambodia. So is Tiahuanaco in Bolivia. These sites are separated by oceans and thousands of years, yet they share architectural principles, astronomical alignments, and construction techniques that remain difficult to replicate even today. Hyperdiffusionists argue this is because they all inherited their knowledge from the same source, a predecessor civilization, Atlantis, and the most logical location for that civilization is Antarctica. But Atlantis is not the only lost continent. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, another legend emerged, the lost continent of Mu, also called Lemuria. The story was popularized by a British-American writer named James Churchward. In 1926, he published a book called The Lost Continent of Mu. Churchward claimed to have discovered ancient tablets in India that described a vast landmass in the Pacific Ocean. This continent, Mu, was home to an advanced civilization that predated all known cultures. It was the cradle of humanity, the Garden of Eden. At its height, Mu had 64 million inhabitants, massive cities, and technology that rivaled or exceeded our own. Then, around 12,000 years ago, Mu was destroyed. Volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, tidal waves. The continent sank beneath the Pacific in a single cataclysmic event. The survivors fled east and west. Some reached the Americas, becoming the ancestors of Native American tribes. Others reached Asia and Polynesia. Like Atlantis, Mu left no physical evidence. No ruins have been found on the Pacific seafloor. No inscriptions, no artifacts. Mainstream science dismisses Mu as pseudo-history. But the timing is interesting. 12,000 years ago, the same time frame as Atlantis, the same time frame as the Younger Dryas impact, the same time frame as the global flood myths. What if Atlantis and Mu were not separate continents? What if they were two parts of the same story? What if there was a global civilization, spread across multiple landmasses, connected by advanced seafaring? Antarctica in the south, a Pacific landmass in the center, outposts in the Americas, Africa, and Asia, a network, a trade system. And when the cataclysm came, when the Earth's crust shifted and the comet struck and the ice advanced, the entire system collapsed. The Pacific landmass, if it existed, may have submerged due to tectonic shifts. Antarctica froze, the survivors scattered, and humanity entered a dark age that lasted thousands of years. There is geological evidence for rapid sea level rise around 11,600 years ago. At the end of the Younger Dryas period, temperatures shot up, ice sheets melted, sea levels rose by over 400 feet in a relatively short period. Coastal settlements around the world would have been inundated, entire regions submerged. If there was a coastal civilization, a maritime culture dependent on trade and navigation, it would have been devastated. The cities gone, the ports underwater, the trade routes severed. Graham Hancock has spent decades researching this possibility. His books, Fingerprints of the Gods and Magicians of the Gods, lay out the case for a lost civilization destroyed by the Younger Dryas cataclysm. Hancock does not claim to know exactly where this civilization was located. He acknowledges that much of the evidence is circumstantial, but he points to the anomalies. The Piri Reis map, the Göbekli Tepe temple complex in Turkey, which dates to 11,600 years ago and shows a level of organization that should not exist in a hunter-gatherer society. The underwater structures off the coast of Japan, India, and the Mediterranean that suggest advanced construction. The genetic bottleneck in human populations around 12,000 years ago, indicating a massive die-off. All of these pieces point to the same conclusion. Something happened, something big, and it reset human civilization. The question is whether that civilization was merely coastal tribes and early agricultural communities, as mainstream archaeology suggests, or whether it was something more, something advanced, something that built in stone and navigated the oceans and understood the stars. If it was the latter, then the survivors would have had knowledge far beyond what we give them credit for, and they would have passed that knowledge on, in fragments, in myths, in monuments. Antarctica fits. It fits geographically, it fits chronologically, it fits thematically. Plato said Atlantis was beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which most interpret as the Strait of Gibraltar. If you sail west through the strait and keep going south, you eventually reach Antarctica. The Egyptian priests told Solon that Atlantis controlled other islands and parts of the continent beyond. That suggests a far-reaching empire, one that could have had colonies or trade partners in South America, Africa, and beyond. And the description of a land with mountains and fertile plains matches the subglacial topography of Antarctica perfectly. Is it proof? No, not even close. But it is a framework. a lens through which to view the anomalies, and it raises the most important question of all. If Antarctica was Atlantis, if it was the heart of a lost civilization, then what remains of it is still there, frozen, buried, waiting, and sooner or later, someone is going to dig it up. Actually, let me ask you something. What time is it where you are right now? I mean it. Check the clock. Are you watching this late at night when everyone else is asleep and you are falling down the rabbit hole of ancient mysteries? Or maybe you are on your lunch break, squeezing in one more video before you have to get back to reality. Wherever you are in the world, whatever time zone you are in, just know that right now, at this very moment, thousands of other people are watching this same video, asking the same questions, wondering about the same mysteries. There is something powerful about that. So take a second and drop a comment. Because here is the thing. These questions, these mysteries about Antarctica and lost civilizations, they do not belong to any one country or culture. They belong to all of us. They are part of our shared human story. And maybe, just maybe, the answers are closer than we think. In January of 1939, as Europe teetered on the brink of war, a German ship called the Schwabenland set sail for Antarctica. The ship was equipped with two massive Dornier flying boats, specialized aircraft designed for long-range reconnaissance. The mission was led by Captain Alfred Richer, a decorated German naval officer. The official purpose was cartography and scientific research. But Germany did not send a ship halfway around the world just to draw maps. The Schwabenland reached the coast of Queen Maud Land in mid-January. Over the next several weeks, the aircraft launched multiple flights over the interior of the continent. They photographed over 600,000 square kilometers of previously unmapped territory, and as they flew, they did something unusual. They dropped metal poles, thousands of them. Each pole was tipped with a swastika flag. The poles were designed to stick into the ice and mark German territorial claims. By the time the expedition ended, Germany had staked out a massive region of Antarctica, roughly the size of France and Spain combined. They named it NEUSCHWABENLAND, New Swabia. Why? Antarctica had no known resources at the time, no strategic value, no indigenous population to subjugate. Yet Nazi Germany, on the verge of invading Poland and launching the deadliest war in human history, took the time and expense to claim a frozen wasteland on the other side of the planet. It makes no sense. Unless they knew something. Unless they found something. The photographs taken during the Schwabenland expedition were classified. Most of them remain classified to this day. The few images that have been released show ice, mountains, and coastal features. Nothing unusual, but rumors began to circulate almost immediately. Rumors that the expedition had discovered ice-free regions in the interior of NEUSCHWABENLAND, warm valleys heated by geothermal vents, caverns large enough to shelter entire fleets, lakes with fresh water, vegetation. Some versions of the story claim the Germans found ancient ruins, structures that predated human history. Others say they simply found the perfect location to build a secret base, hidden, inaccessible, thousands of miles from any enemy. Then the war started. Germany invaded Poland in September of 1939. Europe erupted into chaos. For the next 6 years, the world burned. And during that time, Antarctica was forgotten, or so it seemed, because there are persistent, unverified reports that Germany continued to send expeditions to NEUSCHWABENLAND throughout the war. U-boats, German submarines, were allegedly dispatched to the Southern Ocean carrying supplies, personnel, and equipment. The voyages were covert. The records were destroyed or never kept in the first place. But the stories remain. 2 submarines in particular have become central to the legend, U-530 and U-977. Both surrendered in Argentina in July and August of 1945, several weeks after Germany officially surrendered in May. The crews were taken into custody. The submarines were searched, and according to official reports, nothing unusual was found. But why did they take so long to surrender? Where had they been for those extra weeks? Standard protocol would have been to surrender immediately or scuttle the boats. Instead, they sailed south. The commander of U-977, Heinz Schaefer, wrote a memoir after the war. In it, He describes a voyage that took his submarine to the far southern Atlantic. He does not explicitly mention Antarctica, but he describes navigating through ice fields and reaching extreme southern latitudes before turning north to Argentina. Why go south before surrendering? What was down there? Schaefer never fully explained. And many of his crew, when interviewed years later, gave vague or contradictory accounts. They had been ordered not to talk. Or perhaps they had been told a cover story and genuinely did not know the truth. The theory that emerged from these fragments is this. As the war turned against Germany in 1944 and 1945, high-ranking Nazis realized defeat was inevitable. They began planning for survival. Not the survival of the Reich, but the survival of its knowledge and technology. They gathered the most valuable assets: advanced aircraft designs, rocketry research, nuclear studies, experimental weapons, and they evacuated them. Some went to South America, some went to the Middle East. But the most sensitive projects, the ones that could not risk falling into Allied hands, went to Antarctica, to Base 211, the hidden fortress in NEUSCHWABENLAND. U-boats would have been the only viable transport. Surface ships were too vulnerable to Allied patrols. Aircraft did not have the range. But a submarine could travel submerged for extended periods, avoiding detection. It could carry cargo and passengers. And it could navigate through the ice fields surrounding Antarctica by surfacing only when necessary. If dozens of U-boats made the journey, and if most of them were scuttled after unloading their cargo, there would be no record, no evidence, just rumors and speculation. What was supposedly taken to Antarctica? Documents, certainly, scientific research, but also people. The story goes that key Nazi scientists, SS officers, and possibly even high-ranking party officials fled to Base 211. Some theories suggest Adolf Hitler himself escaped Berlin and was smuggled to Antarctica via submarine. The official story is that Hitler committed suicide in his bunker on April 30th, 1945. His body was burned and later recovered by Soviet forces, but the Soviets never released conclusive forensic evidence. And for years after the war, rumors persisted that Hitler had escaped. The FBI took these rumors seriously enough to investigate. Declassified FBI documents from the late 1940s show that the agency received multiple tips claiming Hitler was alive and hiding in South America or Antarctica. Most of the tips were dismissed. But the fact that they were investigated at all suggests there was uncertainty. The man who supposedly ruled Germany with absolute authority, who started a war that killed 60 million people, might have slipped away unnoticed. It sounds absurd, but stranger things have happened. Then there is the technology. Nazi Germany was working on advanced weapons systems toward the end of the war. They had the V-2 rocket, the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. They had jet aircraft, including the Messerschmitt Me 262, which entered service in 1944 and was far faster than anything the Allies had. They were experimenting with helicopters, infrared optics, and guided missiles, and according to some sources, they were working on something even more exotic: anti-gravity propulsion, flying discs, what the modern world would call UFOs. The most famous of these alleged projects is Die Glock, the bell. According to the story, Die Glock was a secret weapon being developed in a facility in Lower Silesia, now part of Poland. The device was bell-shaped, roughly 9 feet wide and 12 feet tall, and it used counter-rotating cylinders filled with a mysterious substance called Serum 525. Some descriptions say the substance was mercury. Others say it was a radioactive compound. When activated, the bell supposedly generated a powerful field that caused strange effects: time distortion, localized gravity anomalies, biological damage to anyone nearby. Several researchers and test subjects allegedly died from exposure. The Bell project was supposedly overseen by SS General Hans Kammler, a high-ranking officer responsible for advanced weapons development. Kammler disappeared in May of 1945. His body was never found. Some say he was killed in the final days of the war. Others say he defected to the United States and was smuggled out during Operation Paperclip, the secret program that brought Nazi scientists to America. But a third theory suggests he went south, to Antarctica, and he took the bell with him. Is there any truth to this? Hard to say. Most of the information about Die Glocke comes from a single source, a Polish weapons researcher named Igor Witkowski, who claims to have seen classified documents describing the project. No one else has been able to verify those documents. Mainstream historians dismiss Die Glocke as a hoax or a misunderstanding of conventional weapons research. But the story persists, and it fits neatly into the larger narrative of Nazi Antarctica, a hidden base, advanced technology, a last-ditch effort to preserve the Reich's most dangerous secrets. If Base 211 existed, if it was real and not just a myth, then Operation Highjump starts to make a lot more sense. The United States would have had intelligence, fragmentary and unreliable perhaps, but enough to justify a major operation. They would have sent Admiral Byrd and 4,000 men not to map the coastline, but to locate and destroy the base. And if they encountered resistance, if they faced technology they did not understand, it would explain the abrupt withdrawal. It would explain the classified documents. It would explain Byrd's cryptic warnings about enemy aircraft flying at fantastic speeds. There is no smoking gun, no definitive proof that NEUSCHWABENLAND was anything more than a territorial claim. But the pieces are there. The expedition in 1939, the U-boats surrendering late, the missing scientists, the classified documents, the massive military response in 1947, and the Antarctic Treaty in 1961, locking down the continent and making it off-limits to everyone. If the Nazis built something in Antarctica, if they hid something there, it is still there, under the ice, waiting. Antarctica was not always ice. That is not speculation. That is geology. Beneath the 2-mile thick ice sheet lies rock, and in that rock, frozen in time, is proof of a radically different world. A world of forests and rivers. A world where life thrived. The question is not whether Antarctica was once green. The question is when, and how recently. In the early 1990s, a team of geologists was conducting fieldwork in the Transantarctic Mountains, a range that cuts across the continent like a spine. They were looking for coal deposits, evidence of ancient organic material. What they found exceeded all expectations. An entire fossilized forest. Trees, still standing in some cases, preserved in stone. The trunks were massive, 40 feet tall, over a foot in diameter. These were not small shrubs. These were towering deciduous trees, and they dated back 280 million years to the Permian period. 280 million years is a long time, long before dinosaurs, long before mammals, but it confirms something critical. Antarctica was not always at the South Pole. During the Permian period, it was part of the supercontinent Gondwana, positioned closer to the equator. The climate was warm, humid, swampy, perfect for forests. As the continents drifted, and Antarctica migrated south, the climate cooled, the forests died, and eventually they were buried under ice. This is accepted science, no controversy. But it raises an uncomfortable parallel. If Antarctica could be green 280 million years ago, could it have been green more recently? In 2017, researchers drilling ice cores in West Antarctica made another discovery. They pulled up sediment samples from nearly 2 miles below the surface. These samples came from rock layers deposited roughly 90 million years ago during the Cretaceous period. When they analyzed the sediment under microscopes, they found something astonishing. Pollen, lots of it, pollen from flowering plants, ferns, conifers. The chemical analysis revealed traces of ancient roots and soil. This was not tundra, this was temperate rainforest. 90 million years ago, Antarctica had a climate similar to modern-day New Zealand, mild temperatures, high rainfall, dense vegetation. And this was during a time when Antarctica was already positioned near the South Pole. How is that possible? The standard explanation is that Earth's overall climate was much warmer during the Cretaceous. There were no polar ice caps. Ocean currents distributed heat more evenly. Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels were higher, creating a greenhouse effect. Antarctica, even at the pole, remained above freezing. Over millions of years, the planet cooled. Ice began to form, and by around 34 million years ago, Antarctica was fully glaciated. End of story. Except that is not quite the end. In the McMurdo Dry Valleys, one of the most Mars-like environments on Earth, scientists found something that does not fit the timeline. Shells. Fossilized shells from marine mollusks. Species that live in relatively warm water. And these shells were dated to around 7,000 years ago. 7,000. Not 7 million, not 70 million, 7,000. That is well within the span of recorded human history. That is after the pyramids of Egypt were being planned, after agriculture had spread across the Middle East, after the Ice Age had supposedly ended, and Antarctica had supposedly been frozen solid for tens of thousands of years. How did warm water mollusks end up in Antarctica 7,000 years ago? The official explanation is localized geothermal activity. Underwater volcanic vents creating pockets of warm water where these species could survive temporarily. But that explanation feels thin. Geothermal vents exist, certainly, but they are isolated, rare. The presence of multiple shell deposits suggests a more widespread phenomenon. And if the water was warm enough to support mollusks, what else was warm? Was there open ocean around parts of Antarctica as recently as 7,000 years ago? Was the ice sheet smaller? Was the coastline different? There is another possibility, one that ties back to Charles Hapgood's Earth crust displacement theory. If the crust shifted around 12,000 years ago, as Hapgood suggested, then Antarctica would have been in a more temperate position before the shift. It would have been green, inhabited, potentially. Then the shift occurred. The continent moved south. The temperature dropped rapidly. Within centuries, the ice began to accumulate. But the process was not instant. For thousands of years afterward, remnants of the old climate would have persisted. Pockets of warmth. Regions where the ice had not yet fully taken hold. Animals and plants clinging to survival in isolated refugia. And eventually those too would have been swallowed by the advancing glaciers. This would explain the shells. It would explain why the Piri Reis map shows rivers and coastlines that match the subglacial topography. It would explain why ancient maps depict Antarctica without ice. Because when those maps were drawn, or when the source data for those maps was collected, Antarctica was not fully frozen yet. It was in transition. A dying land, yes, but not yet dead. Dinosaur fossils have been found in Antarctica. Not just any dinosaurs. Predators. Cryolophosaurus, a large carnivorous theropod, was discovered in the Transantarctic Mountains in 1991. It lived during the early Jurassic, around 190 million years ago. At that time, Antarctica was still part of Gondwana, forested and teeming with life. But the discovery of Cryolophosaurus confirmed that even after the continents began drifting apart, Antarctica remained warm enough to support large ecosystems. It had rivers, lakes, prey animals, a full food web. The extinction of these ecosystems did not happen overnight. It took millions of years of gradual cooling. But once the Ice Age began in earnest, around 34 million years ago, the process accelerated. Glaciers advanced, temperature plummeted, and anything that could not migrate north was trapped, frozen in place. And here is the thing. We have only explored a fraction of what lies beneath the ice. Ground-penetrating radar can give us rough outlines. We can see mountains and valleys and lakes, but we cannot see details, we cannot see fossils, we cannot see artifacts, we cannot see ruins. If there was a human civilization in Antarctica 12,000 years ago, we would not know unless we physically drilled down and found it. Even more intriguing are the ice-free zones that exist in Antarctica today. The McMurdo Dry Valleys are the largest ice-free region on the continent, roughly 4,000 square kilometers of exposed rock and soil. The valleys are kept ice-free by katabatic winds, fierce downslope winds that evaporate ice before it can accumulate. The climate is extreme, colder than the surrounding ice sheet, and yet life exists there. Microscopic organisms, algae, lichens, nematodes. These organisms survive in the harshest conditions on Earth. If life can persist in the dry valleys today, could it have persisted elsewhere in Antarctica during periods of less extreme cold? Could there be pockets, sheltered valleys, geothermally heated caves, where life held on long after the ice consumed the rest of the continent? Some researchers believe these refugia could still exist. Deep beneath the ice, in caverns warmed by volcanic activity, ecosystems might endure, cut off from the surface, evolving in isolation. And if ecosystems can survive, then perhaps, hypothetically, so could remnants of human habitation. Not a thriving city, not a functioning civilization, but survivors, descendants of an original population, adapted over thousands of years to life underground. It sounds like science fiction, but we have found complex ecosystems in caves miles underground in other parts of the world. We have found bacteria living in solid rock. Life is more resilient than we ever imagined. And Antarctica, beneath the ice, is still largely unknown. Mount Erebus rises over 12,000 feet above Ross Island in Antarctica. It is the southernmost active volcano on Earth, and it has been erupting continuously since at least 1972, possibly much longer. At the summit sits a lava lake, one of only a few permanent lava lakes in the world. Molten rock churns and boils in an open crater, glowing red against the frozen whiteness of the surrounding landscape. The contrast is surreal. Hell and ice existing side by side. But the lava lake is not what makes Erebus interesting. What makes it interesting is what lies beneath. The mountain is honeycombed with caves, miles of interconnected tunnels carved by centuries of volcanic activity, steam vents, lava tubes, caverns large enough to walk through. And inside these caves, the temperature is comfortable, around 70 degrees Fahrenheit in some sections. Warm enough that researchers working inside have to remove their jackets. Warm enough that ice melts. Warm enough that moss grows on the walls. Moss. In Antarctica. Not fossilized, not ancient, living moss. Green and soft to the touch. It survives on the warmth and moisture from the volcanic vents. It photosynthesizes using whatever dim light filters in from the cave entrances. And it proves something crucial. Life can exist in Antarctica without ice, without the harsh surface conditions. All it needs is heat and shelter. Mount Erebus is not unique. Antarctica has multiple volcanoes, though most are dormant or less active than Erebus. But even dormant volcanoes generate geothermal heat. The Earth's interior is hot. Magma chambers and tectonic activity create thermal gradients. And wherever that heat reaches the surface or the base of the ice sheet, it melts ice. It creates cavities, voids, spaces where liquid water can pool and air can circulate. Radar surveys have detected these spaces, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands. They exist beneath the ice across large swaths of the continent, forming a hidden network of subglacial environments that we have barely begun to explore. In 2017, researchers mapping the ice sheet near Mount Sidley in West Antarctica discovered something unusual. A massive system of caves extending beneath the glacier. The caves are formed by steam from volcanic vents. The air inside is warm, breathable, and when scientists sent cameras into the accessible sections, they found evidence of complex microbial ecosystems, bacteria, fungi, algae. These organisms form thin biofilms on the rock walls, surviving on geothermal energy and trace nutrients. But the cameras could only penetrate so far. The cave system extends for miles beyond what has been explored. It descends deep into the bedrock, and no one knows what lies in the deeper sections. Could larger organisms exist down there? Insects? Small mammals? It seems unlikely. There is no obvious food source, no sunlight for photosynthesis. But we have found thriving ecosystems in deep ocean, hydrothermal vents, where sunlight never reaches. Those ecosystems are based on chemosynthesis, bacteria that convert sulfur and methane into energy. The bacteria form the base of a food web that includes shrimp, crabs, tube worms, and fish. If similar chemistry exists in Antarctica's subglacial caves, then similar ecosystems could exist. And if ecosystems exist, then the caves could support life far more complex than microbes. Now take this idea one step further. If these caves have existed for thousands of years, providing warmth and shelter in an otherwise frozen wasteland, could they have been used by humans? Not modern humans, not researchers with high-tech gear, but ancient humans, survivors of a collapsing civilization. people fleeing the advancing ice. Imagine you are living in Antarctica 12,000 years ago. The climate has been stable for generations. Your people have built cities along the coast, farms in the interior valleys, ships ply the waters, trading with distant lands, and then the world changes. The temperature drops, not gradually but suddenly. Within a generation, snow that used to melt in summer stops melting. It accumulates. Glaciers begin to form. The growing season shortens. Crops fail. The ocean freezes further from shore each year. Ships can no longer navigate. Trade collapses. Your civilization is dying. What do? You cannot sail north. The ships are trapped by ice. You cannot march north. The distance is too great and the cold too severe. Your only option is to go underground, to seek out caves warmed by volcanic heat, to stockpile food and supplies, to adapt. Some of your people leave, taking whatever boats can still break through the ice, fleeing to warmer lands. But others stay. They retreat into the earth. They become cave dwellers. And over centuries, they adapt to the darkness, to the isolation, to a life entirely divorced from the surface world. This is the theory of subglacial survival. It is speculative. There is no direct evidence, but it is not impossible. We know the caves exist. We know they are warm. We know life thrives there. The question is whether humans, or their distant ancestors, ever took refuge in those caves. And if they did, whether their descendants might still be there. The idea sounds absurd until you remember Lake VOSTOK, a lake that has been sealed off for 15 million years, a lake that contains life forms with DNA unlike anything else on Earth. If life can evolve in isolation for that long, adapting to extreme pressure and near-freezing temperatures, then it can adapt to life in a cave. And humans are the most adaptable species on the planet. We live in deserts, we live in jungles, we live in the Arctic. We build cities on fault lines and floodplains. We survive. We endure. Could a small population have endured beneath the ice of Antarctica? Could they have built a hidden world, lit by volcanic glow, warmed by the Earth's furnace? Could they be there still, unknown and unseen, waiting for the day the ice retreats and the surface world becomes habitable again? It is a romantic notion. It is also, in all likelihood, false. But the caves are real. The heat is real. The life is real. And until we fully explore what lies beneath the ice, we cannot say for certain what is down there, or who. We have sent satellites to map every inch of Earth's surface. We have radar that can penetrate clouds, jungles, and oceans. We have imaging technology so precise it can read a license plate from orbit. And yet Antarctica remains, in many ways, a blank spot on the map. Not because we lack the technology to see it, but because what we see raises more questions than it answers. In 2001, an international collaboration of scientists launched the BedMap project. The goal was simple: use ice-penetrating radar to map the bedrock beneath Antarctica's ice sheet. Radar works by sending radio waves down through the ice. When the waves hit rock, they bounce back. By measuring the time it takes for the signal to return, you can calculate the depth of the ice and the shape of the land beneath it. It is the same principle submarines use for sonar, and it works remarkably well. The first BedMap survey revealed something stunning. Antarctica is not a flat, featureless plateau buried under ice. It is a continent with dramatic topography, mountain ranges, deep valleys, vast plains. The Gamburtsev Mountains, for instance, are a range located in the heart of East Antarctica. They rise over 9,000 feet above the bedrock, roughly the height of the European Alps, and they are completely buried. No peaks protrude through the ice. If you were standing on the surface directly above them, you would see nothing but flat white ice stretching to the horizon, but beneath your feet, towering mountains. How did mountains form in the middle of a stable continental craton? Geologically, it makes no sense. The East Antarctic craton is old, stable. It should not have active mountain-building processes. And yet the Gamburtsev Mountains exist. Some geologists believe they are remnants of ancient tectonic collisions, preserved because the ice sheet prevented erosion. Others suggest they formed through more recent geological activity that we do not fully understand. Either way, their existence was completely unknown until radar revealed them. Which raises the question, What else is down there that we have not found yet? In 2013, the BedMap project released an updated survey, BedMap 2, higher resolution, more coverage. And the findings were even stranger. The radar detected subglacial lakes, hundreds of them, ranging in size from small ponds to bodies of water larger than Lake Superior. These lakes are liquid, despite being miles beneath ice because of pressure and geothermal heat. But more importantly, the lakes are connected. Radar showed channels, subglacial rivers flowing between lakes, forming a vast hidden hydrological network. Water moves beneath the ice. It circulates. It carves tunnels through the bedrock, and in some cases it flows all the way to the ocean. One of the most significant discoveries was the detection of massive subglacial canyons. The largest, located beneath the Transantarctic Mountains, is over 60 miles long and more than a mile deep in places. It rivals the Grand Canyon in scale, but it is completely invisible from the surface. If you were to remove the ice, Antarctica would have some of the most dramatic landscapes on Earth. Canyons, lakes, rivers, mountain ranges. It would look like New Zealand or Patagonia, but instead, it is entombed. Then came the gravitational anomalies. In 2006, NASA launched a pair of satellites called GRACE, Gravity Recovery and Climate Experiment. These satellites measure tiny variations in Earth's gravitational field. Regions with more mass, like mountains or dense mineral deposits, have slightly stronger gravity. Regions with less mass, like ocean trenches or low-density rock, have weaker gravity. By mapping these variations, GRACE can detect geological features that are invisible to other methods. When GRACE scanned Antarctica, it found something unexpected in Wilkes Land, a region of East Antarctica, a massive gravitational anomaly. The anomaly is circular, roughly 300 miles in diameter, and it suggests the presence of an enormous dense structure buried deep beneath the ice and bedrock. The leading theory is that this is an impact crater, specifically, the remnant of a massive asteroid strike that occurred around 250 million years ago during the Permian-Triassic extinction event, the worst mass extinction in Earth's history. If true, this impact could have been one of the triggers for the extinction. But here is the thing. Impact craters leave specific signatures: shocked quartz, iridium layers, melted rock. And while there is some evidence consistent with an impact, the data is not conclusive. The anomaly could also be explained by a massive concentration of iron or nickel in the crust, or by volcanic intrusions, or by something else entirely. Without drilling down through miles of ice and rock, we cannot know for sure, and no one has attempted that yet. In 2018, another discovery. Satellites detected a massive hole in the ice over the Weddell Sea, not a small crack. Apollonia, an area of open water surrounded by ice, measuring over 35,000 square miles. That is larger than the state of Maine. The Apollonia appeared suddenly in the middle of winter, when the sea ice should have been at its thickest. It stayed open for weeks before freezing over again. What caused it? The official explanation is an upwelling of warm water from the deep ocean. Ocean currents occasionally bring warmer water to the surface, melting the ice from below, but the size and timing of the Apollonia were unusual. Some researchers suggested it might be linked to volcanic activity on the sea floor. Others speculated about concentrated geothermal vents. And a few, the ones willing to entertain alternative theories, wondered if something beneath the ice, something generating heat, had caused the melt, something artificial. Google Earth has become a tool for amateur researchers to scan Antarctica for anomalies, and they have found plenty. Blurry patches that look like pixelated censorship, geometric shapes that appear too regular to be natural, circular depressions that resemble crater, impacts or sinkholes, long linear features that look like runways or roads. Most of these can be explained as natural formations, image artifacts or shadows, but not all of them. Some remain genuinely puzzling. One of the most debated is a formation at 75 degrees south, 0 degrees east. It appears on satellite imagery as a perfectly circular structure, approximately 2 miles in diameter, with radial lines extending outward like spokes on a wheel. Some claim it looks like a giant gear or mechanical component. Others say it is simply a circular mountain or volcanic caldera. The resolution is too low to tell, and the location is so remote that no expedition has visited it. The truth is, satellite data gives us a surface-level view. Radar gives us a rough outline of what is beneath, but neither can provide the detail needed to definitively identify artificial structures if they exist. To do that, we would need to physically go there, drill, excavate, explore. And that brings us back to the Antarctic Treaty. The treaty prohibits most intrusive activities. It restricts where you can go and what you can do, and it ensures that the vast majority of Antarctica remains untouched, unseen, unknown. There are people who have been to Antarctica, thousands of them, researchers, support staff, military personnel, pilots, engineers. Most of them come back with stories of harsh weather, stunning landscapes, and the profound isolation of working at the bottom of the world. But a few come back with stories that do not fit the official narrative, stories they are reluctant to tell, stories that get them labeled as conspiracy theorists or attention seekers, and yet they tell them anyway. In 2016, a man identifying himself only as Brian, claiming to be a contractor who worked at the Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory at the South Pole, posted on several online forums. He said that during his time there, he became aware of restricted zones within the research station, areas that were off-limits even to most staff. He described sections of the facility that required special clearance, sections that were not listed on any official floor plans. When he asked colleagues about these areas, he was told they were storage or equipment rooms, but the security was too tight for storage. Armed guards, biometric locks, and the people who did have access never talked about what they did there. Brian claimed he once saw a convoy of vehicles heading inland from the station, toward a region that was marked as a no-go zone on all maps. The convoy included heavy equipment. Drilling rigs, he thought, though he could not be sure. When he asked where they were going, he was told it was a classified geology project. He never saw the convoy return. A few weeks later, he was informed his contract was being terminated early. No reason given. He was flown out within 48 hours. He has not been back to Antarctica since, and he has no way to prove any of what he says is true. Stories like Brian's are common in certain corners of the internet, anonymous testimonies, unverifiable claims, but the consistency is striking. Multiple people, working at different stations, during different years, report similar experiences: restricted zones, unexplained convoys, projects that are never discussed, security that seems excessive for a scientific research station. Are they all lying? Are they all mistaken? Or is there something happening in Antarctica that the public is not being told about? In 2003, the History Channel aired an interview with a retired Chilean naval officer. The officer, whose name was withheld, described an incident from 1965. He was aboard a Chilean naval vessel conducting patrols near the Antarctic Peninsula. It was early evening, clear skies, calm seas. And then, without warning, something emerged from the water. He described it as disc-shaped, metallic. It rose silently from the ocean, hovered for several seconds, and then accelerated upward, at a speed he said was impossible. The object left no exhaust trail, made no sound, and disappeared into the clouds within moments. The officer reported the incident to his superiors. He was told to include it in the ship's log, but to avoid discussing it publicly. Other crew members witnessed the same event. All of them filed reports, and all of them were told the same thing: do not talk about it. When asked decades later why he decided to come forward, the officer said he was old, retired, and he wanted people to know what he saw. He had no explanation for it. He did not claim it was extraterrestrial. He simply said it was real, and it came from the ocean near Antarctica. Then there are the letters. In the late 1990s, a series of letters began circulating among researchers interested in Nazi history and Antarctica. The letters were allegedly written by a German submarine crew member named Karl Unger. According to the letters, Unger served aboard a U-boat that traveled to Antarctica in the final weeks of World War II. He described arriving at a hidden base, entering a cavern system lit by artificial lights, seeing aircraft that looked nothing like conventional planes. The letters were detailed, specific, and completely unverifiable. No one has been able to confirm that Carl Unger existed. No naval records match the details in the letters. They could easily be a hoax, but if they are, someone went to a lot of trouble to make them convincing. In 2015, an anonymous post appeared on a whistleblower website. The poster claimed to be a former employee of Lockheed Martin, one of the largest defense contractors in the United States. He said he worked on a project in Antarctica, involving the construction of a deep underground facility. He did not specify the location. He did not provide blueprints or photographs, but he described the scale: massive excavation, reinforced tunnels extending miles beneath the ice. The stated purpose, he said, was research. But the security, the secrecy, the resources being poured into the project suggested something far more significant. The post was deleted within hours. The user account disappeared, and no follow-up information ever surfaced. Are these testimonies credible? In isolation, probably not. Anonymous sources, no corroborating evidence, no documents, no photographs. But taken together, they form a pattern. A pattern of people who claim to have seen or experienced things in Antarctica that do not align with the official story. And whether those things are secret military projects, unexplained phenomena, or something else entirely, the fact remains that Antarctica is a place where secrets can be kept, where vast distances and extreme conditions make verification nearly impossible, and where the people who know the most are often the ones least willing to talk. There is a temple in Turkey that should not exist. It is called Göbekli Tepe, and it was built 11,600 years ago. That date is not approximate. It is confirmed through radiocarbon dating of organic material found at the site. 11,600 years ago places Göbekli Tepe firmly in the Stone Age, a time when humans were supposed to be nomadic hunter-gatherers, small bands wandering the landscape, following herds, gathering plants, living hand to mouth. They had no cities, no agriculture, no writing, and yet someone built Göbekli Tepe. The site consists of massive stone pillars arranged in circular formations. The pillars are T-shaped, some weighing over 10 tons. They are carved with intricate reliefs, animals, abstract symbols, human figures. The level of craftsmanship is extraordinary, and the organization required to build it is staggering, quarrying the stones, transporting them, lifting them into place, carving them. This was not the work of a few individuals. This required a large, coordinated labor force. It required planning, leadership, resources. It required a society far more complex than anything we thought existed at that time. Archaeologists have no good explanation for Göbekli Tepe. The standard narrative of human development says that agriculture came first. Settling down to farm allowed populations to grow, which led to specialization, which led to social hierarchy, which eventually led to monumental architecture. But Göbekli Tepe reverses that sequence. The people who built it were not farming. There is no evidence of domesticated plants or animals at the site. They were still hunting and gathering. And yet they built a temple complex that rivals anything constructed thousands of years later. How? And more importantly, why? One possibility is that Göbekli Tepe was not built by primitives stumbling towards civilization. It was built by survivors, people who already possessed advanced knowledge and were trying to preserve it. If a global cataclysm destroyed an earlier civilization around 12,000 years ago, the survivors would have scattered. They would have lost most of their technology, most of their population, but they would still have knowledge, engineering principles, astronomy, mathematics, and they might have tried to pass that knowledge on by building monuments, teaching the people they encountered, becoming the culture heroes and gods of later myths. This is the theory that researchers like Graham Hancock have spent decades exploring. The idea that there was a lost civilization, a predecessor culture that existed before the Younger Dryas impact and was destroyed by it. And the civilizations we know, Egypt, Sumer, the Indus Valley, were not independent developments. They were reboots, built by people who inherited fragments of knowledge from the lost world. Look at the Great Pyramid of Giza. It was built around 4,500 years ago during Egypt's 4th dynasty. the precision is absurd. The base is level to within fractions of an inch, over a footprint of 13 acres. The sides are aligned to the cardinal directions with an error of less than 1/10 of a degree. The ratio of the pyramid's height to its base perimeter is almost exactly 2 pi. That is not a coincidence. That is intentional encoding of mathematical constants. The ancient Egyptians, according to mainstream history, did not have a formal concept of pi. And yet, there it is, built into the structure of their most famous monument. The Great Pyramid sits at a location that is, geographically, the center of Earth's landmass. If you draw lines of latitude and longitude that divide the world's land into equal quadrants, they intersect at Giza. Who chose that location? How did they know? Modern satellite surveys were needed to confirm it. The Egyptians did not have satellites. They did not have accurate world maps. And yet they built the pyramid in the exact spot that a civilization with global knowledge would choose. Then there is the alignment. The 3 pyramids of Giza align with the 3 stars of Orion's belt, not as they appeared when the pyramids were built, but as they appeared around 10,500 BC, 12,000 years ago. Why would the Egyptians align their pyramids to a star pattern from 8,000 years before their time, unless they were following a much older plan? A blueprint handed down from an earlier era. Across the ocean, in the Andes Mountains of Bolivia, sits another impossible site, Pumapunku. The ruins consist of massive stone blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, cut with a precision that defies explanation. The blocks are made of andesite and diorite, some of the hardest stones on Earth. They have perfectly flat surfaces, sharp 90-degree angles, interlocking grooves that fit together like Lego bricks. The tolerances are so tight that you cannot slip a piece of paper between the stones. Modern stonemasons struggle to replicate this level of precision even with diamond-tipped power tools. The people of Pumapunku supposedly had copper chisels and stone hammers. It does not add up. Radiocarbon dating places Pumapunku at around 14,000 years old, though this is disputed. Some archaeologists argue it is much younger, around 1,500 years old. But even if we accept the younger date, the precision remains unexplained. No civilization in South America at that time had the technology to cut stone with such accuracy, and yet the stones are there, perfectly cut, perfectly fitted, abandoned and crumbling, as if the builders simply walked away mid-project. The same patterns appear around the world. Angkor Wat in Cambodia, built in the 12th century, but aligned with astronomical precision to the spring equinox. Teotihuacan, in Mexico, a massive city laid out on a grid, aligned to celestial events, built by a culture that disappeared before the Aztecs arrived. The Aztecs called the city Teotihuacan, which means the place where the gods were created. They did not build it. They did not know who did. They only knew it was ancient and sacred. Sacsayhuaman in Peru, massive stone walls with blocks weighing up to 200 tons. The stones are cut into irregular polygonal shapes that fit together so precisely that mortar was unnecessary. The Spanish conquistadors who saw it thought it was built by demons because they could not believe humans were capable of such work. Modern engineers have tried to move stones of that size using replicas of ancient tools. They cannot do it. Not without cranes. Not without modern machinery. These sites share common features: megalithic construction, astronomical alignments, precision engineering, and an absence of clear historical records explaining who built them or how. Mainstream archaeology attributes them to the known civilizations of the regions. The Egyptians built the pyramids. The Inca built Sacsayhuaman. The Khmer built Angkor Wat. But that explanation often relies on assumptions. We assume the Egyptians built the pyramids because they were there when the pyramids were standing. But what if the pyramids were already there? What if the Egyptians inherited them? The Sphinx offers a clue. Geologist Robert Schoch studied the weathering patterns on the Sphinx enclosure and concluded that the erosion was caused by water, prolonged rainfall, not wind or sand, but rain. Egypt has been arid for thousands of years. The last time the region experienced heavy rainfall was at the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. If Schoch is right, the Sphinx is far older than Egyptologists believe. It predates the pharaohs. It predates dynastic Egypt. It was built by someone else. There is a concept in archaeology called hyperdiffusionism. It is considered fringe by most academics. The idea is that many ancient civilizations did not develop independently. Instead, they were seeded by a single mother culture. This mother culture had advanced knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering. It existed before recorded history and was destroyed in a cataclysm. The survivors spread across the globe, carrying their knowledge with them. They taught the primitive peoples they encountered, and over time those teachings became the foundation for the great civilizations of antiquity. Egypt, Sumer, the Indus Valley, China, Mesoamerica. All of them suddenly appear in the historical record with fully developed writing systems, advanced mathematics, and monumental architecture. There is little evidence of gradual development. It is as if civilization turned on like a light switch. One moment, hunter-gatherers. The next, pyramids and cities. Hyperdiffusionists argue this is because these civilizations did not start from zero. They started with inherited knowledge from the lost world. If Antarctica was that lost world, if it was the center of a global maritime civilization before the ice, then the survivors who fled would have landed in South America, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. They would have brought seeds, tools, maps, and most importantly, knowledge. They would have taught the locals how to build in stone, how to navigate by the stars, how to calculate pi, and align structures to celestial events. And those teachings would have been preserved, passed down through generations, encoded in monuments and myths. The Library of Alexandria held the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world. Hundreds of thousands of scrolls, texts from Egypt, Greece, Rome, Persia, India. When it burned, most of that knowledge was lost forever. We will never know what was written in those scrolls, what histories, what maps, what references to older, forgotten civilizations. But we know the library existed because the ruins are still there. We know it was real, and if the knowledge of a lost Antarctic civilization was recorded anywhere, it would have been in places like Alexandria. But those places are gone, burned, flooded, destroyed by time and conquest, and with them, the proof. November 8th, 2016, Election Day in the United States. One of the most contentious and closely watched elections in modern history. Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump. The entire country was glued to their screens, waiting for results. And on that day, the United States Secretary of State, John Kerry, was not in America. He was in Antarctica. Kerry's trip was announced as a visit to McMurdo Station to observe the effects of climate change. He met with scientists. He toured research facilities. He gave a press conference about the importance of environmental protection. All very official, all very mundane, except for the timing. Why would the Secretary of State, one of the most senior officials in the government, choose Election Day to visit the most remote continent on Earth? Why not wait a week? Why not send an assistant secretary or a climate envoy? Why go himself? The official explanation is that the trip had been planned for months and the timing was coincidental. Kerry's office stated that he wanted to see firsthand the impact of melting ice and rising temperatures. But the optics were strange. And in the world of geopolitics, optics matter. When high-ranking officials do unusual things, people notice, and they ask questions. Kerry was not the only high-profile visitor to Antarctica in 2016. In February of that year, Patriarch Kirill of Moscow, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, made a highly publicized trip to the continent. He visited a Russian research station and conducted a religious service. When asked about his visit, Kirill made a cryptic statement. He said he had traveled to Antarctica to see the sacred nature of creation and that the continent held signs of the divine. He did not elaborate. Religious leaders visit remote places all the time, but Antarctica, for a man in his 70s, the trip would have been physically demanding and logistically complex. What was important enough to justify it? Then there was Buzz Aldrin, the second man to walk on the moon, an American icon. At 86 years old, Aldrin traveled to Antarctica in November of 2016 as part of a tourist expedition. Shortly after arriving, he became ill and had to be evacuated. His condition was described as fluid in his lungs, Altitude sickness, essentially, though Antarctica is not particularly high altitude at the coast. He was flown to New Zealand for treatment and recovered. But before he was evacuated, Aldrin allegedly sent a tweet that has since become legendary in conspiracy circles. The tweet read, "We are all in danger. It is evil itself." Attached was a photo of a pyramid-shaped mountain in Antarctica. The tweet was deleted within hours. Aldrin's team later claimed his account had been hacked. They said the message was not from him and the photo had been posted by someone else. But screenshots of the tweet spread rapidly online, and people noticed that the photo attached showed what appeared to be the same pyramidal structure that had been identified in satellite images. The structure, at 79 degrees south, the one that looks too symmetrical to be natural. Was the tweet real? Was it hacked? We will probably never know. Aldrin has not spoken publicly about the incident, but the timing was suspicious. 3 high-profile figures, Kerry, Kirill, and Aldrin, all visiting Antarctica within months of each other, all in 2016. Why? One theory is that something was discovered, something significant enough to warrant visits from political, religious, and scientific leaders. Perhaps a structure beneath the ice. Perhaps biological evidence of ancient life. Perhaps something else entirely. The visits could have been coordinated to observe the discovery firsthand and assess its implications. If true, the question becomes, why keep it secret? The discovery of ancient ruins or advanced life forms in Antarctica would be one of the most significant events in human history. It would rewrite textbooks. It would change our understanding of the past. Why hide it? The answer, according to conspiracy theorists, is control. If the discovery involved technology, even ancient technology, governments would want to secure it before making it public. If it involved evidence of non-human intelligence, the revelation could cause panic, social upheaval, or religious crises. The decision might have been made to study the discovery in secret, extract whatever value it holds, and release information gradually, if at all. This would explain the continued restrictions on access to certain regions of Antarctica, the no-fly zones, the classified military operations, the treaties that prevent exploitation until 2048. Speaking of 2048, that date keeps coming up. The Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1961, imposed a ban on mining and resource extraction. That ban is set to expire in 2048. After that, countries will be free to renegotiate the terms, and many nations are already positioning themselves for that moment. China has massively expanded its Antarctic presence in recent years, building multiple research stations and increasing the frequency of expeditions. Russia has been drilling deeper into the ice, reaching subglacial lakes that have been isolated for millions of years. The United States maintains a strong presence at McMurdo and continues to operate classified projects under the cover of scientific research. Why are they all preparing? What do they expect to find or access after 2048? The official answer is resources. Antarctica is believed to hold vast reserves of oil, natural gas, coal, and rare earth minerals. With global demand increasing and easily accessible deposits running low, Antarctica represents a massive untapped reserve, but mining in Antarctica would be extraordinarily expensive and environmentally devastating. The ice would have to be removed or tunneled through. Equipment would have to operate in temperatures that freeze hydraulic fluid, and the international backlash would be severe, unless the resources are worth it, unless there is something down there valuable enough to justify the cost. Or perhaps the preparations are not about extraction, perhaps they are about access. If something was discovered, something that cannot be moved or fully explored with current technology, the interested parties would need to wait until they have the legal and logistical ability to mount large-scale operations. Operations that require heavy machinery, permanent infrastructure, and unrestricted access. The kind of operations that are currently prohibited by the Antarctic Treaty but will be permissible after 2048. Then there is Marie Birdland, the largest unclaimed territory on Earth. 1.6 million square kilometers of West Antarctica that no country has formally claimed. Every other region of Antarctica has been claimed by at least one nation, and many regions are claimed by multiple nations with overlapping boundaries. But Marie Birdland? Nobody wants it. Officially, this is because the region is so remote and inhospitable that it has no strategic value, but Marie Byrd Land is also home to several of the most significant anomalies detected by satellite and radar: the pyramid structure, the alleged cave openings, the gravitational anomalies, the no-fly zones. If something is hidden in Antarctica, it is likely in Marie Byrd Land, and if no country claims it, then no country is officially responsible for controlling access to it, which could be exactly the point. The conspiracy theories range from plausible to absurd. Some believe Antarctica is being used as a testing ground for advanced military technology, black-budget aircraft, directed energy weapons, propulsion systems based on classified physics. The isolation and harsh conditions make it an ideal location for testing without prying eyes. Others believe Antarctica is home to an extraterrestrial presence, either ancient ruins left by visitors thousands of years ago, or an active base operated by non-human intelligence. Admiral Byrd's warnings about aircraft that could fly from pole to pole are cited as evidence, as are the numerous reports of UFO sightings in the region. And then there are those who believe the truth is simpler but no less shocking, that Antarctica is hiding evidence of a lost human civilization. That beneath the ice are cities, temples, and technology that predate recorded history, and that the powers controlling access to Antarctica know this and are working to suppress or monopolize the discovery. Why? Because it would disrupt the established historical narrative. It would raise questions about who we are and where we came from. It would challenge religious doctrines and scientific orthodoxy. And in the process, it might shift the balance of power on a global scale. Are any of these theories true? Without access to classified documents or the ability to conduct independent exploration, it is impossible to say. But the pattern of secrecy, the high-level visits, the restricted zones, and the looming deadline of 2048 all point to one undeniable conclusion: Antarctica matters. And whatever is down there, someone is very interested in keeping it quiet. Let us be clear about something. The scientific community does not support the theory that Antarctica was home to an advanced ancient civilization. Not even close. Mainstream archaeologists, geologists, and historians have examined the evidence presented by alternative researchers and found it unconvincing. They have explanations for the anomalies. Explanations that do not require lost civilizations, ancient aliens, or secret Nazi bases. And those explanations are worth hearing. Start with the Piri Reis map. Yes, it shows a landmass south of South America. Yes, some of the coastline features bear a resemblance to Antarctica. But mainstream cartographers argue that the map does not actually depict Antarctica at all. What it shows, they say, is the eastern coast of South America, distorted and extended southward due to errors in copying and projection. Medieval and Renaissance maps are full of distortions. Coastlines are stretched, landmasses are misshapen, islands appear where none exist. This is because mapmakers were working with incomplete data, often copying from earlier maps that were themselves inaccurate. The Piri Reis map, according to this interpretation, is simply a flawed representation of known geography. The fact that some features coincidentally resemble Antarctica's subglacial coastline is just that: coincidence. As for the rivers and mountains depicted on the map, skeptics point out that these features are vague and stylized. Medieval maps often included decorative elements, imaginary geography, and symbolic representations that were not meant to be accurate. The mountains on the Piri Reis map might not represent real mountains. They might be artistic flourishes. The rivers might be speculative, and the resemblance to Antarctica's hidden topography might be the result of people seeing what they want to see. Pareidolia. The human brain is wired to find patterns, even when none exist. The same explanation applies to the so-called pyramids in Antarctica. Geologists have examined the satellite images and identified the structures as nunataks, pyramidal peaks formed by natural erosion. When glaciers carve a mountain from multiple sides, they create sharp edges and triangular faces. The Matterhorn in Switzerland is a famous example. It looks almost perfectly pyramidal, but it is entirely natural. The structures in Antarctica, including the one at 79 degrees south, fit this pattern. They are located in mountainous regions. They exhibit weathering consistent with glacial erosion, and their dimensions, while impressive, are not unusual for natural formations. The alleged precision and symmetry of these structures, skeptics argue, is an illusion created by low-resolution satellite imagery, lighting angles, and observer bias. If someone went to the site and examined the structures up close, they would find rough, irregular surfaces, cracks, weathering, all the hallmarks of natural rock. The problem is that no one has gone to the site. It is too remote, too dangerous. So the debate continues based on images alone, and images can be deceiving. Operation Highjump is another area where mainstream historians push back hard. The operation was large, yes, but it was not unprecedented. The United States had just emerged from World War II with the largest navy in the world. Ships and personnel were available. The military was looking for ways to keep crews trained and test equipment in extreme environments. The Cold War was beginning, and the Arctic and Antarctic were seen as potential theaters of conflict. Conducting a large-scale operation in Antarctica made strategic sense. It was about readiness, not about hunting Nazis or investigating ancient ruins. The early withdrawal, according to official records, was due to weather and the loss of the George I aircraft. Antarctica in February is approaching winter. Conditions deteriorate rapidly. The decision to leave early rather than risk additional casualties or equipment losses was prudent, not suspicious. As for Admiral Byrd's statements about enemy aircraft, skeptics note that Byrd was speaking in the context of the emerging Cold War. The enemy he referred to was likely the Soviet Union, which was developing long-range bomber aircraft. His warning was about the vulnerability of the United States to attack via polar routes, not about UFOs or advanced Nazi technology. The classification of Operation Highjump documents is also not unusual. Many military operations from that era remain classified due to standard protocols, sensitive equipment details, or outdated security concerns. The fact that documents are still sealed does not mean they contain shocking revelations. It might simply mean that no one has bothered to declassify them because there is no public demand, or because they touch on topics that are still considered sensitive, like Cold War intelligence methods. What about the Nazi base at NEUSCHWABENLAND? Historians acknowledge that Germany did send an expedition to Antarctica in 1938 and 39. They did claim territory. They did drop swastika flags. But there is no credible evidence that they built a base. No photographs, no construction records, no post-war testimonies from German personnel confirming its existence. The two U-boats that surrendered late in Argentina, U-530 and U-977, were thoroughly searched. Allied intelligence interrogated the crews. Nothing unusual was found. The delays in surrender can be explained by confusion, fear of capture, or attempts to evade immediate detection. They do not require a secret mission to Antarctica. Die Glock, the alleged Nazi wonder weapon, is even more dubious. The primary source for the story is a single researcher, Igor Witkowski, who claims to have seen documents, but no one else has verified those documents. No blueprints exist. No test sites have been located. Most historians believe Die Glock is either a misinterpretation of conventional weapons research or an outright fabrication. Nazi Germany did develop advanced technology, including rockets and jet engines, but there is no evidence they achieved anti-gravity or anything close to it. Lake Vostok and the reports of strange organisms are real. The lake exists. Microbes have been found, but the sensational stories about organism 46b are not supported by peer-reviewed science. Russian researchers have published findings about the microbial diversity in the lake, but they have not reported giant squid-like creatures or intelligent life forms. The stories appear to have originated from anonymous online posts and have been embellished over time. The truth is interesting enough. The discovery of life in such an extreme environment has profound implications for astrobiology, but it does not require monsters. The magnetic anomaly at Lake Vostok and the gravitational anomaly at Wilkes Land both have plausible natural explanations. Magnetic anomalies can be caused by concentrations of iron-rich minerals in the crust. Gravitational anomalies can be caused by dense rock formations or impact structures. Scientists have studied both anomalies and concluded that they are consistent with known geological processes. They do not require artificial structures or alien technology. As for the high-profile visits to Antarctica in 2016, the scientific community points out that politicians and celebrities visit unusual places all the time for publicity, diplomacy, or personal interest. John Kerry's visit was part of a broader effort to raise awareness about climate change. Patriarch Kirill's visit was a religious pilgrimage to one of the most remote and pristine places on Earth. Buzz Aldrin's visit was a bucket-list adventure for an aging astronaut. The timing might seem suspicious, but correlation does not imply causation. Just because multiple people visited Antarctica in the same year does not mean they were coordinating or responding to a discovery. The scientific consensus is clear. Antarctica is an extraordinary place. It holds valuable information about Earth's climate history, biology, and geology. But it is not hiding a lost civilization. It is not home to alien bases or Nazi fortresses. The ice is simply ice. The anomalies are natural formations, and the mysteries, while fascinating, have rational explanations. To believe otherwise requires ignoring evidence, misinterpreting data, and embracing speculation over science. And yet, for all the pushback, for all the logical explanations, one question remains. If the answers are so simple, why does Antarctica still feel like it is hiding something? So, where does that leave us? We have ancient maps that show Antarctica without ice. We have pyramidal structures rising from the frozen landscape. We have Operation Highjump, a massive military expedition that ended abruptly and remains partially classified. We have Lake Vostok, sealed for millions of years, harboring life forms with DNA unlike anything else on Earth. We have testimonies from people who claim to have witnessed things they cannot explain. And we have a treaty that locks down an entire continent, preventing exploitation until 2048. On one side, we have the scientific establishment. They offer rational explanations, natural formations, mapping errors, Cold War logistics, standard geological processes, and their explanations are reasonable, logical, supported by data. On the other side, we have the alternative researchers. They point to the anomalies, the coincidences, the patterns that seem too consistent to dismiss, the questions that do not have satisfying answers. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Antarctica is almost certainly not Atlantis. The pyramids are almost certainly natural mountains. Operation Highjump was almost certainly a military training operation, albeit one with elements we may not fully understand, but almost certainly is not the same as definitely. And that gap, that sliver of uncertainty, is where the mystery lives. Because here is what we know for sure. Antarctica was green once. It had forests and rivers. It had a climate that could support complex life. And if the Earth's crust shifted, if the continent moved rapidly from a temperate zone to the pole, then it is possible, however unlikely, that a civilization existed there before the ice. Not a high-tech utopia, not Atlantis with flying cars and laser beams, but perhaps a maritime culture, people who built in stone, navigated by the stars, and mapped the coastlines, people whose knowledge was passed down through survivors and became the foundation for later civilizations. We also know that vast regions of Antarctica remain unexplored. The subglacial lakes, the cave systems, the deep interior valleys hidden beneath miles of ice. We have mapped the surface, we have glimpsed the bedrock, but we have not dug, we have not excavated, we have not truly looked. And until we do, we cannot say with absolute certainty what is down there. The year 2048 is approaching. The mining ban will expire. Nations will be free to exploit Antarctica's resources. And when that happens, when the drills go deep and the excavations begin, we may finally get answers. We may find nothing but rock and ice and ancient fossils. Or we may find something that changes everything. Until then, Antarctica remains what it has always been, a frozen enigma, a continent of secrets, a place where the past and the present collide, where science and speculation blur, and where the biggest questions about our history remain unanswered. What if Antarctica is the missing continent of a forgotten race? We do not know, not yet. But maybe, just maybe, we are about to find out.